global peace and security. On the 26th of June, 1945, in San Francisco, the United Nations was born. And in the Charter of the United Nations, these potent words were etched. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. 80 years later, in a sinister echo, Russia is violating the most essential principles of this founding text. Since the 24th of February 2022, it has been perpetrating unjustifiable atrocities in Ukraine. Russia is acting in a lawless way. Vladimir Putin is acting in a lawless way. The International Criminal Court in March 2023 issued an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin for the deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia. Russia was condemned by the General Assembly of the United Nations, a resolution dating March 2022, a resolution dating February 2023, the resolution dating February 2025, and not to mention the resolution dating March 2014. On 9 occasions, the General Assembly denounced the Russian invasion, called for a ceasefire, for the respect of the integrity of Ukraine, and for a just, lasting peace in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. Despite all of these condemnations, Vladimir Putin has dug in his heels. Brutality, lies, uninhibited violence. Thousands of Russian and Ukrainian lives have been sacrificed. To what end? To realize an imperialist a fantasy to quench imperial thirst. But frankly speaking, it is clear that Russia has failed. President Trump stated today that it is a paper tiger. Less than 1% of Ukrainian territory has been conquered over the past 1,000 days of war. Civilian Russian economy is flailing, asphyxiated by the war economy and by sanctions, which Vladimir Putin continues to expose his own population to. And in order to mask its failure, the Kremlin has redoubled its violent and aggressive stance. To mask the failure, Vladimir Putin has rained fire on cities of Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol, Dnipro, Kharkiv, Odessa, Chernihiv, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. These are martyrized cities, heroic cities. Each night, hundreds of drones and missiles target homes, target schools, target hospitals. Russia has in flagrant breach of international humanitarian law has resulted in tremendous civilian casualties. In order to hide these failures, Vladimir Putin has sought to foment conflict with unacceptable incursions in the airspace of Poland, Romania, and Estonia, hybrid attacks, electoral manipulations, digital attacks which target the democracies of Europe. This will not work. Nothing will cause the Ukrainian spirit of resistance to fail. Nothing will weaken our support for Ukraine. And the principles of the Charter in Russia is making a very significant error if it continues to doubt the unity and the resolution of NATO allies, if it continues to pursue its dangerous escalation on the eastern flank of Europe. On 24 February last, Mr. President, the Security Council, through Resolution 2774, which is tabled by the United States and supported by the Russian Federation, for an end to the conflict as soon as possible. This resolution needs to be implemented in full. We want peace. Ukraine wants peace. Ukraine is only asking for one thing, namely respect for its right to itself determine its future, respect for the right of its people themselves, which is set out under the Charter. These are non-negotiable principles, and it is applicable to Kiev and throughout the world. This is a very principle of the existence of our nations, and it is incumbent upon us as members of the Security Council to uphold this. Mr. President, Russia is lawless. Russia is failing. Ukraine wants peace. Ukraine wants freedom. At this table, and it should have full support. Thank you.
His Excellency, Ms. Baron, for the statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Yvonne Cooper, MP, Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the Secretary General for his briefing, and thank you to President Zelensky and Minister Sibiya. The United Kingdom commends you for your leadership and your determination. Thank you too for welcoming me to Kyiv 2 weeks ago, where I saw firsthand the impact of Russia's brutal war. And I met families whose lives had been uprooted, their homes destroyed, their children's education torn apart. But as Putin cynically stalls on peace, I also saw a nation resolute in its fight. And I saw the strength and the courage of the Ukrainian people, the soldiers, civilians, the mothers and fathers, first responders, healthcare workers, who are standing up to defend their homes and their land. Russia's illegal and unprovoked war of aggression is not just a test of Ukrainian resilience and security. It is an assault on the United Nations Charter and its most foundational principles, respect for sovereignty and for territorial integrity, principles on which we all depend every day and feel acutely whenever they are threatened. And it is an assault on the UN Charter by a member of this Security Council. President Zelensky has made clear that he wants peace and wants this war to end, that he and Ukraine have supported a full, unconditional ceasefire and reaffirmed his readiness to meet President Putin. Alongside European partners, the US and President Trump are working to support a peace process, but Putin continues to choose war. He has rejected calls for a meaningful ceasefire. He has refused even to meet President Zelensky in a neutral venue. And Putin's strategy includes the forced deportation, indoctrination, and militarization of children. It includes the intensifying of targets against civilians, strikes on Ukrainian cities and critical infrastructure, on families as they sleep in their beds at night. Civilian casualties have risen nearly 40%, with children killed in playgrounds, diplomatic premises and government buildings damaged, hospitals and schools destroyed. And these are not accidents of war. They are the result of a cruel strategy targeting the people and communities of Ukraine. But anyone who knows Ukrainians knows that this will never succeed, because their determination to hold on to their freedom, to protect their families, their nation, far exceeds Russia's ability to take those things away. And indeed, what we have seen is Ukraine repeatedly undermine Russia's military goals, so that despite the huge Russian mobilization attempts in the last 3 years, their overall impact on their military goals has been minimal. In this war that they started, their losses are now 20 times higher than were Soviet losses in Afghanistan. In this war that they are continuing to pursue, they're struggling to recruit. And in some areas, their stocks are so low they have resorted to using military equipment from the 1950s. What is this for? Because as Ukraine stands firm against Russia, the United Kingdom stands firm with Ukraine. We know that Ukraine's security is our security, and all of us depend on upholding the UN Charter. We know that Russia exports interference, disinformation and instability well beyond Ukraine, from cyber attacks in Moldova to the deployment of mercenaries in the Sahel. Russia's actions seek to undermine democracies, fuel conflict, and spread instability far beyond Europe's borders. And in recent weeks, we've seen provocative and reckless violations of NATO airspace in Estonia, Poland, and Romania. against which NATO stands firm, and we will be ready to act. So the UK will continue to stand with Ukraine, providing the support it needs to defend itself now and to rebuild in the future. Rebuilding as a strong, prosperous nation, free to make its own choices. And so I say to the representative of the Russian Federation, we will target your ailing economy, your oil and gas revenues that are paying for this war, the defense industries making your munitions and weapons, because we know for Russia, the price of war is piling up and the sanctions are tightening the screws. Falling energy revenues are squeezing the state budget and oil revenues are now at a 5-year low, but we will go further, be in no doubt. And to our Ukrainian friends, I say, you have the UK's unwavering support now and for decades to come. And to this Council, I simply offer a reminder that 80 years ago, our predecessors came together as United Nations to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. That mission remains as noble today as it was in 1945. Each generation is tested anew, and we must rise to this test for Ukraine and for us all. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Cooper for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Attaf, Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, National Community Abroad, and African Affairs of Algeria. Vous avez la parole.
Shukran. Shukran.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are meeting once again to recognize with great regret, pain and bitterness the ongoing war that is raging in Ukraine. This war now is going into its 4th year, and we still can't see a solution on the horizon. And in the near future, we can't see any possibility of putting a lasting end to the effects of this war. My country had hopes with regard to the good offices and diplomatic efforts undertaken this year, and which had as their aim putting an end to this war through dialogue and negotiation. This is the only way that will allow the two warring parties to achieve the goal that they wish for. Today, even more than in the past, we would reiterate that these good offices and diplomatic efforts need to be relaunched. We must promote their impact, and in order to close the doors to escalation and the possibility of the conflict further widening in the region. This situation can only have disastrous consequences. The clear disparity between the positions of the two parties on a number of crucial issues must not prevent us from working towards bringing together the differing points of view and to reduce those differences, and also to reach a common ground of understanding that can revive hope with regard to a better future for these two neighbouring countries and a better future for the European continent, and finally a better future for the whole world. Algeria is one of the countries that is firmly convinced that when we talk about the Russian-Ukrainian war, what we're speaking about is a conflict where all parties are suffering damage and loss, and no party is benefiting. All parties are losing out here. Nobody is winning. Each party is facing considerable negative effects that threaten Europe and the whole world. Bilaterally, this war has cost the two parties, Russia and Ukraine, cost them considerable losses that cannot be measured, losses in human lives, losses in terms of the infrastructure that's been destroyed, and losses with regard to the huge economic, political, and social burdens that this war has brought about for both countries. At a regional level, this war has brought the whole European continent into its most serious crisis since the Second World War, in terms of security, politics, and the economy, but also in cultural terms. Globally, the repercussions of this war have been felt in all regions of the world without exception. These effects have affected those countries near and far, be that in terms of food security and energy security, or with regard to its harmful effect on international relations, its effect on polarization, deepening divides, and the crisis now affecting the collective security system. All of this has stemmed from this war. For all of these reasons, and for other reasons as well, we reaffirm day by day that ending this war will not only preserve the interests of the parties involved, but solving this war is in the public international interest. And these considerations overall have are the background to an initiative launched by the President of Algeria to deploy his good offices between the two parties in the conflict, Russia and Ukraine, on the basis of our historic friendship between Algeria and those that today have become two parties to this conflict. This requires, on our part, intensive work in order to put an end quickly to this war and find a lasting solution and sustainable peace. We are firmly convinced that the momentum of good offices and the diplomatic initiatives must be given priority over military confrontation, so that we can all play our respective roles in contributing to preparing the ground for a fair, lasting, and sustainable solution to this crisis, a political and peaceful solution, because the solution can only be political and peaceful in terms of its approach and its content, a solution that will guarantee that the root causes of the conflict are addressed and that the security interests of the two parties are taken into account. This approach, indeed, is the only one that will be able to provide a lasting and stable solution, which we all long for without delay. And finally, a solution that is based on the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter, as well as in international law, because it's those principles that are there to be the arbiter between member states during a dispute. They protect all parties and they preserve the interests of all parties, without any discrimination or favoritism. I thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Attaf for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Hugh Hilton Todd, Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. President. Please accept my commendations for the Republic of Korea's efficient handling of the Council's business this month. I also like to thank the Secretary General for his valuable perspectives. Mr. President, Excellencies, Today's meeting comes at a time when the ongoing war is at a heightened risk of spreading, with violation after violation of the territorial integrity of neighboring states. Guyana rejects the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any nation state. All nations must be free to determine their own destinies as free peoples, including the projection and the protection of their interests. We therefore join the international community in reaffirming the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter and call for an immediate end to the conflict and attendant violations of international law. We deeply regret that a peaceful resolution is yet to be found and that the repeated calls for good faith negotiations and the cessation of hostilities have not been heeded. Even as Resolution 2774 remains unimplemented, we remain convinced that a peaceful solution is still possible and the only viable path forward. Peace, after all, can never be achieved through force, nor by one side imposing its will upon the other. Genuine and lasting peace requires strong political will, good faith dialogue, and a firm commitment by all involved to sustaining those efforts. Mr. President, Excellencies, as the search for a solution continues, we, the members of the Security Council, must be concerned with the repeated and persistent violations of international law that are taking place. Violations that have placed civilians in Ukraine and Russia squarely at the mercy of combatants. The protections granted to them under international humanitarian law have been stripped away, and they have become victims of deliberate targeting. Their safety and security are imperiled and their vulnerability exploited for military advantage. Moreover, by abducting children, blocking access to humanitarian aid, and attacking critical civilian infrastructure, the damage wrought on civilian lives continues to magnify. The effects of this situation, including the mass destruction of cities and the prolonged economic, social, and psychological impacts, will be acutely felt for years to come. Children have paid particularly high price on account of the violence meted out, especially in the attacks against schools and hospitals. Guyana has always spoken out firmly against such actions and does so again today. We continue to demand that the parties respect humanitarian principles and uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law and international human rights law. We also recognize that ending such violations would require the complete withdrawal by the Russian Federation of its military forces from the internationally recognized territory of Ukraine. Mr. President, even as we continue to demand an end to the war, we continue to be confronted with multiple allegations of violations of the airspace of neighboring countries. As we have stated in previous occasions, every member state has a legal obligation to uphold the provisions of the United Nations Charter and to respect the territorial integrity of other states. Guyana calls for an end to the ongoing violations, which risk igniting a broader regional conflict. We have said this many times. Attempts to resolve a conflict through military escalation will only exacerbate the situation and make a peaceful resolution more difficult. At this critical juncture, we call for an urgent ceasefire and for the parties to commit more firmly to peace through dialogue. Resolution 2774 must be implemented. Guyana urges the international community to work in concert to support those efforts. We will continue to do our part as a member of this council. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Todd for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Marco A. Rubio, Secretary of State of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and all of you for convening here today on this important matter. When President Trump took office, he made it among his highest priorities the restoration of peace anywhere and everywhere in the world where the opportunity presented itself. And it's met with great success in a number of places. We had a conflict between India and Pakistan, which was a very dangerous conflict, and one that he chose to engage in and was able to bring it to, be very involved in bringing it to a cessation of hostilities. When Thailand and Cambodia were engaged in hostilities, the president got involved over a weekend over in the United States, and were able to play a critical role in that regard as well. We are very grateful to some of the countries in this room that were helpful in that regard with the DRC and Rwanda, and work remains to be done. But again, a conflict that presents grave dangers and extraordinary humanitarian challenges. With Azerbaijan and Armenia as well. He has become involved, and we were able to sign an agreement at the White House very recently that hopefully prevents a future conflict which would prove costly and deadly. But the one that's proved to be an extraordinary challenge has been the war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. The president has worked on it tirelessly, has invested a tremendous amount of his own time, energy, and the highest levels of our government. We have had meetings in Turkey, meetings in Saudi Arabia, meetings in Alaska, countless phone calls, doing everything possible to bring this conflict to a resolution and to an end. A war that cannot end militarily. It will end at a negotiating table. That's where this war will end. But the longer it lasts, the more people will die, the more will be destroyed. Some of the numbers we are seeing in the loss of life among military personnel, for example, on the Russian Federation side, are staggering. Staggering. In 1 month alone, more loss of life than in the entirety of the U.S. engagement in Afghanistan or Iraq. This war has to end, and we have done everything we possibly can and will continue to do everything we possibly can to bring it to an end. Very generous offers have been made. For example, a ceasefire at the current lines of contact, while all the other details on the future of the conflict could be worked out in terms of future territorial lines. The president has shown extraordinary patience in terms of not assessing additional sanctions in the hopes of having a breakthrough in this regard. And all has come to what appears to be not just a stagnant one, but an era, and we've entered a period of what appears to be potential even escalation, with the historically highest number of strikes we've seen over the last few nights and before. And now we are also watching incursions into neighboring airspace by both drones and airplanes. The president is a very patient man. He's very committed to peace, but his patience is not infinite. And as he has said repeatedly, he has before him the opportunity and the options of imposing additional economic costs on the Russian Federation if necessary in order to bring this to an end. He also has before him the option, as he has already chosen to do in some circumstances, to sell defensive weaponry and potentially offensive weaponry so that Ukraine can defend itself from this assault by purchasing that weaponry. So I'm here to say to the Security Council, the United States remains as committed as it has ever been to a peaceful resolution to this dangerous conflict. But there will come a moment in which we will have to conclude that perhaps there is no interest in a peaceful resolution. And then the president has before him real options, which he intends to pursue, as he has made clear today in some of the messages he has put out. So I strongly urge the Security Council, the member states here, and those who are not part of this as well, to do everything in their power, and including the Russian Federation, to do everything within their power, and the Ukrainian side for that matter as well, but all sides, to bring this war to an end before it becomes something that will last another 3 or 4 years, lead to more destruction, both economic and at the same time a loss of life and loss of property and loss of futures. This war needs to end. But if it does not, if there is no path to peace in the short term, then the United States and President Donald J. Trump will take the steps necessary to impose costs for continued aggression. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Rubio for the statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Mrs. Alexandra Papadopoulou, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I would like to thank the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Korea to the UN for convening this meeting. At a time when the United Nations and its membership should celebrate the 80th anniversary of this organization's founding, the world faces multiple and severe crises, while many countries suffer from the scourge of war. Greece firmly believes that all crises could and should be averted through dialogue and diplomacy. Unfortunately, in the case of unprovoked Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, this defied all diplomatic efforts and resulted in unprecedented loss of human life. For almost 4 years, Europe has experienced the most disastrous war in its territory since World War II. Greece has consistently backed all efforts to put an end to the war in Ukraine. We supported, along with the vast majority of the UN membership, relevant General Assembly resolutions. We assisted this fellow European country in its time of dire need. Above all, we joined our voice with other countries on the need for peace. Greece has welcomed the US-led initiatives and the decisive efforts to stop the bloodshed in Ukraine, firmly believing that the time for peace is long overdue. 3 direct rounds of negotiations between Ukraine and Russia have produced some results with regard to the exchange of prisoners and civilian detainees. Greece welcomes these agreements and their implementation and further calls on Russia to engage in goodwill in further negotiations. We regret that Russia has not yet agreed to a leaders' meeting and that it has shifted away from the path to peace, proceeding to reckless acts that affect EU and NATO borders. As a staunch proponent of international law and the UN Charter, Greece unequivocally condemns any violation of internationally recognized territory by land, air, or sea. Any change of borders as a result of the use of force is unacceptable and sets a dangerous precedent that could incite armed aggression and imitators elsewhere. We desire peace. As Thucydides has taught us, war is a choice, not an inevitability. We call on Russia to choose peace and cease hostilities. Our primary goal now should be a permanent, comprehensive, just and lasting peace settlement that will be fully in line with international law, the UN Charter, the General Assembly resolutions, and the Helsinki Final Act. As a non-permanent member of this Council, Greece stands ready to work in this direction. Lastly, Greece firmly believes that a peaceful resolution for Ukraine without Ukraine is not possible. We likewise view Europe and its nations as an integral part of any solution to end the war. Together with our European partners, we will continue to prioritize Ukrainian, in other words, European security. To that end, we stress that any future peace agreement should be founded on credible and robust security guarantees to preclude the recurrence of war and ensure an independent, democratic, and sovereign future for Ukraine. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Mrs. Papadopoulou for her statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Syed Tariq Fatemi, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister, Minister of State of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Secretary General. I thank the Secretary General for his insightful briefing. I echo his call for peace and the need to bring the protracted conflict in Ukraine to an end. I welcome the presidents of Ukraine, Greece, France, and Slovenia, as well as the foreign ministers of US, UK, and Guyana to this meeting, and the ministers and high-level representatives of other member states. Mr. President, the conflict in Ukraine has raged on for over 3.5 years. it has impacted the regional and international security landscape. Continued fighting has caused immense human suffering. Repercussions of this conflict extend far beyond its geographical expanse. Increased polarization and geopolitical tensions, disruption of supply chains, food and energy insecurity, global inflation, and much more. The Global South has borne a disproportionate brunt of these consequences. Mr. President, we have consistently maintained that there is no military solution here or in the foreseeable future. Every bullet fired, every rocket and drone launched, every life lost moves us further away from peace. We call upon the parties to demonstrate restraint, scrupulously adhere to the international humanitarian law, and make meaningful strides towards de-escalation. Mr. President, given the complex historical context and the intricate nature of this conflict, the logic of singling out third countries and placing this blame elsewhere is not conducive to the pursuit of peace. Mr. President, a glimmer of hope did emerge at the start of the year to pursue the path of dialogue and diplomacy. The Security Council adopted Resolution 2774, mourning the tragic losses of life, reaffirming the Charter's principle to peacefully settle disputes, imploring a swift and end to the conflict, and urging a lasting peace between Ukraine and Russia. Pakistan supported this resolution. Pakistan also welcomed the ensuing political engagement, including direct talks between Russia and Ukraine, facilitated by the US President himself. It generated optimism for an early end to this conflict. We certainly hope that these efforts will bear fruit. Our collective priority must be to silence the guns and create conditions for a negotiated settlement. As an ardent advocate for peace and a firm believer in the power of dialogue and diplomacy, we will support all endeavors aimed at resolving the issue peacefully. That was also the spirit of Resolution 2788 adopted by the Council in July. Mr. President, the path of peace is the only responsible choice. A sincere and meaningful dialogue, which addresses the security concerns of all sides, is anchored in the principles of the UN Charter and international law, and respects the relevant multilateral agreements, can help secure peace, which is both just and sustainable. Pakistan will continue to support all regional and international efforts that pave the way for a peaceful resolution of this conflict. I thank you, sir.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Fatemi. Okay. So I thank His Excellency Mr. Fatemi for the statement. Thank you. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Javier Martinez Achav Vasquez, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Panama.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Excellencies. Panama would like to thank the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for the information provided regarding the conflict in Ukraine. We welcome the presence of the various countries who join us once again today to address the situation regarding the conflict between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Since the beginning of the Russian invasion in 2022, Panama has reiterated its concern over the breakdown of international peace and security, as well as the dire consequences of this war, which, first and foremost, affect the civilian population. We are entering the fourth year of this war, whose origin, stemming from the invasion of a sovereign state, has been the subject of numerous unsuccessful meetings of this Council. In this regard, Panama, respectful of international law, rejects any violation of the sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of Ukraine, and we condemn the use of force by one state against another. We reaffirm the primacy of these principles, not as a rhetorical exercise or an abstract aspiration, but rather as a moral and legal obligation incumbent upon the entire international community, principles that must be safeguarded and defended wherever they are under threat. The recent violation of the airspace of Poland and Romania, as well as yesterday's meeting called in response to the incursion of Russian combat aircraft into Estonian airspace, are troubling signs of the escalation in the conflict, which undermines the recent diplomatic efforts promoted by the United States with the support of European countries to bring an end to this war. Panama reiterates that dialogue is the only path to the peaceful resolution of this conflict, that with the necessary political will, it is possible to establish the conditions that guarantee respect for international obligations and safeguard peace and security. All of this within a broad framework of freedom and the sovereign equality of states, with full respect for their sovereignty and territorial integrity. This war, the most devastating in Europe since 1945, with a humanitarian crisis that has led to high numbers of civilian and military deaths, injuries, disappearances and displacements, and which has also driven an unprecedented increase in global military spending, this war must come to an end. The effects of this tragedy are not confined to a single region. Its humanitarian, economic and political repercussions are global in nature and are felt in all areas. For 80 years, Panama has upheld the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and in international humanitarian law as essential pillars for peaceful coexistence between peoples. Our country has maintained that respect for these norms is the greatest contribution that we can offer humanity in order to preserve future generations from the scourge of war. Today, we reaffirm the validity of their normative value and the preservation of their integrity and universality as indispensable elements to guarantee the stability of the international order and respect for human rights. For Panama, multilateralism constitutes an indispensable tool for success and an example of effective international cooperation which, from our own experience, we can say has proven its effectiveness in promoting peace, resolving conflicts peacefully, and helping to confront the common challenges of the present and of the future. Mr. President, only with the will of each member state of this Council and the readiness to transform rhetoric into actions for peace can we demonstrate the effectiveness of this United Nations body and our ability to bring peace to peoples suffering the consequences of war. Panama expresses its hope that all parties involved will act with determination to achieve, without delay, a just and lasting peace, one that respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine and the human rights of all those people affected. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Acha Vasquez for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
President, I thank Secretary General Guterres for his briefing. Allow me to make 4 points. First, dialogue and negotiations remain the fundamental path forward. Recently, positive momentum has emerged in the dialogue and negotiations on the Ukraine crisis, with key parties holding a series of engagements and talks. However, significant differences remain in their positions and demands. The parties to the conflict should intensify their efforts, demonstrate political will, show flexibility, and take seriously and address properly each other's legitimate security concerns, so as to reach a comprehensive, lasting, and binding peace agreement at an early date. Second, promoting de-escalation is a pressing priority. At present, there are no signs of a halt to hostilities on the ground. The parties to the conflict continue to carry out large-scale drone and missile attacks, and substantial quantities of arms and ammunition continue to flow into the battlefield. China has consistently called for adherence to the 3 principles of no expansion of the battlefield, no escalation of the fighting, and no fanning up the flame by any party. We hope all parties will play a constructive role in de-escalating the situation and in creating the necessary conditions for a ceasefire and the cessation of hostilities at an early date. Third, alleviating the humanitarian crisis is a moral imperative. Civilians are the greatest victims of war. Each additional day of conflict brings an additional day of suffering to the people. The parties to the conflict should exercise restraint, strictly abide by international humanitarian law, and refrain under all circumstances from attacking civilians and civilian infrastructure, and avoid the use of WMDs. The international community should step up its humanitarian assistance efforts in order to help those affected by the crisis overcome their difficulties. Fourth, containing the spillover effects of the crisis is a shared responsibility. The crisis has taken a big toll on global economic development, with developing countries bearing the brunt. The international community should strengthen cooperation on issues such as food, energy, finance, trade, and the protection of critical infrastructure in order to jointly maintain the stability and smooth functioning of global supply chains. Abusing unilateral sanctions and long-arm jurisdiction under the pretext of the crisis does not contribute to a political settlement. On the contrary, it creates new problems and should therefore be rejected. President, since the first day of the crisis, China has been upholding an objective and impartial position, calling for a ceasefire and cessation of hostilities, and advocating for peace talks towards a political settlement. Guided by the 4 shoulds put forth by President Xi Jinping, we have maintained close communication with parties concerned, sent our special envoys for shadow diplomacy, and together with Brazil and other countries of the Global South, initiated the Group of Friends for Peace in order to consolidate calls for peace, promote consensus on peace, and advance peace efforts. China stands ready to work with the international community and continue our constructive role for the early political settlement of the crisis. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we thank you for convening this briefing on Ukraine at the request of Slovenia, Denmark, Greece, France, and the United Kingdom. I welcome President Volodymyr Zelensky's participation at this meeting. I thank the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his comprehensive and sobering briefing. We also welcome the participation of ministers from neighboring countries in this meeting. For nearly 4 years, this Council has called for an end to a conflict that continues to inflict devastating harm on civilians and critical infrastructure. Since 2022, nearly 14,000 civilians, including over 700 children, have been killed and more than 35,000 injured. Sierra Leone has consistently condemned the disregard for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the peaceful settlement of disputes enshrined in the UN Charter. Article 2.3 obliges member states to resolve their disputes by peaceful means while refraining from the threat or use of force. The neglect of these principles and international law in this conflict is troubling, as is the repeated use of force and the Council's failure to secure a ceasefire. This conflict will not be resolved on the battlefield, but through a negotiated ceasefire and peace agreement that addresses the legitimate concerns of the parties. Mr. President, in light of the foregoing, I wish to make the 4 points. First, international humanitarian law must be respected. Attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure, whether in Ukraine or Russia, violate the principles of proportionality, precaution, and distinction. Second, the conflict toll on children and women is particularly grave. Thousands of children have been killed, injured, or traumatized, while many women face disproportionate impacts on their livelihoods. We call for the immediate return of Ukrainian children and women's inclusion in peace and recovery processes. Third, humanitarian needs remain immense. Over 12 million people require assistance, with millions displaced internally and across Europe. The destruction of infrastructure, contamination of land by mines, and the onset of winter make unhindered humanitarian access and sustained funding more urgent than ever. Fourth, good faith ceasefire and peace negotiations must be pursued. Confidence-building measures such as prisoner exchanges and the return of children should be built upon. We commend the efforts of Turkey in this regard. We are concerned by violations of the airspace of Poland, Romania, and Estonia, which risk wider escalation. The Security Council must support political dialogue to prevent regional conflagration. The conflict has already severely disrupted global economic supply chains, resulting in shortages and price increases of critical food and fuel supplies. Mr. President, Sierra Leone continues to call for dialogue and diplomacy in line with Article 33 of the Charter as the only path to a just and sustainable peace. We urge negotiations toward a peaceful settlement that respects Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity while addressing the legitimate security concerns of all parties. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the Secretary General for his briefing on the worrying developments in Ukraine and the wider region. We meet today as the war in Ukraine enters yet another difficult chapter and a conflict whose origins stretch back years and whose consequences have rippled far beyond its borders. The latest developments only reinforces the urgency and complexity of the crisis. In that regard, I would like to make the following points. First, we are deeply troubled by the ongoing escalation of attacks impacting civilians and essential civilian infrastructure. Hospitals, schools, and homes must never become casualties of war. Protecting civilians, particularly the most vulnerable among them, and preserving essential infrastructure are obligations enshrined under international law. Our delegation reiterates that all parties to the conflict must respect and uphold these principles without exception. Second, we must acknowledge that there can be no military solution to this conflict. My delegation welcomes the ongoing peace efforts spearheaded by President Trump to bring an end to this protracted conflict. We believe that every opportunity for peace and diplomacy, however brief, must be seized and built upon. We take note of the upcoming planned meeting between President Trump of the United States and Ukrainian President Zelensky on the sideline of the United Nations General Assembly, which we hope will advance dialogue and diplomacy. We also commend the humanitarian mediation efforts, including prisoners of war exchanges, and progress on these issues can build the trust necessary for broader engagement. Third, we are concerned by the recent reported military developments in the wider Eastern European region, which could escalate into a broader war in the region. These incidents underscore the escalating nature of the conflict and highlight the urgent need for a comprehensive de-escalation and utmost restraint by all parties to prevent a wider conflagration. Constructive and good faith engagement remain essential, and only through sustained diplomatic efforts and willingness to compromise can bring durable and just peace be achieved. Mr. President, in closing, my delegation reaffirms its unwavering support for all efforts aimed at addressing the root causes of the conflict and achieving a just and lasting peace in accordance with the United Nations Charter. The people of Ukraine and all those affected by this crisis deserve a future and a path to peace founded upon peace, security, and dignity. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is very much lamentable that the membership of the Security Council has been compelled today to spend time and be present at a meeting which was initiated by our European colleagues purely to mark the latest New York stop on the tour of the well-known former actor. And here we see squeezed in as during the subway at rush hour, where we hear and will continue to hear mere replicated statements which have nothing to do with the true. There is no added value for the establishment of peace in Ukraine generated from today's meeting, which is obvious, and this will merely become yet another shameful episode in the market of hypocrisy, which is seen in the presentation of the Ukrainian theme by European states. European sponsors of the Zelensky regime want the United Nations Security Council to live, as they do, in some kind of a parallel reality where Ukraine is not losing on the battlefield, losing city after city, and where Ukrainian citizens are queuing in line in order to die in the pointless slaughter for the advancement of Western geopolitical interests. This is a perverted picture which some are attempting to impose upon us. In this picture, Ukraine is an island of democracy and freedom. Its leader, usurper, broke his electoral pledge and has thrown thousands of fellow citizens into the dungeons. According to their picture, he is supported by all Ukrainians who apparently don't need any elections because they have such an outstanding president. Those who play into the hands of this Ukrainian puppeteer need to understand that essentially they're becoming complicit in the criminal manipulation, the purpose of which is to prevent a long-term just and lasting peace in Ukraine, which stipulates inter alia the development of such security guarantees that would preclude the threat of new conflict in Europe. This essentially is a conspiracy which is geared towards Ukrainians continuing to die, for Ukrainians to continue to die by the thousands in this senseless fratricidal slaughter which Western foes of the Russian Federation have been preparing for many years, seeking to weaken our country, to undermine our security and economic capability. What is unaddressed here is a perverse manifestation that is egregious for any civilized state, and not a single country in the neighborhood or any self-respecting country would tolerate this. Essentially, what is proposed inter alia is for us to turn a blind eye to the Kiev marionettes who are blind are mad with Russophobia and the permissiveness of their suzerains. They are not even considering rejecting the persecution of Russian citizens of Ukraine who are prohibited, contrary to the constitution of the country, prohibited from speaking in their mother tongue. tongue and teaching their children in their mother tongue. And before our very eyes, people under threat of death and persecution are forced to deny their own identity, their moral, historical roots and values, and the so-called European democracies are clapping and cheering, baselessly alleging that Russia allegedly is trampling upon the identity of Ukrainian identity. But this was never a goal. This is an insolent lie advanced by the Kiev princeling to intimidate and brainwash the international community. It is proposed that we forget the neo-Nazi regime in Kiev, emboldened by impunity, which seized power following a coup sponsored by the West in breach of the UN Charter, which fired upon defenseless people in the southeast of Ukraine, using tanks and weapons, throwing bombs on them, and burning people alive in the trade union building, and mocking them just because they're Russian and refuse to accept the misanthropic ideology of the Kiev regime. And then the regime for 7 years under the smokescreen of the Minsk agreements was armed to the teeth, provided with intelligence data, and prepared for war with Russia, as was acknowledged by a number of European politicians who were directly complicit here. And we are called upon not to notice how Ukraine is glorifying those who, during the war, together with the Nazis, destroyed hundreds of thousands of Jews, Poles, Russians, Roma, Ukrainians, and not to notice how Ukrainian partners of Kiev shamefully are casting down their eyes when they see etched on the bodies of neo-Nazi Ukrainian fighters swastikas and other Nazi or neo-Nazi symbolism, which is prohibited in their own countries. Mr. President, in order to try to force the world to think on the basis of their own grotesque paradigm, the history, in their view, began in February 2022. They do not wish to recall the violations of the pledge not to expand NATO eastward, about the indivisibility of security, to expunge from people's memories the fact that of what they wrought in Kiev in 2014, cherry-picking from the UN Charter a single principle about respect for territorial integrity of states, forgetting about sovereign equality and non-intervention in domestic affairs, and the right of peoples to self-determination. They see a problem only in actions, which became a response to their own steps. On the go, they are supplanting international law with the so-called rules-based order, which is based on rules which they themselves concoct and impose upon others. The Ukrainian crisis is the direct result of their actions and their acts, which have been undertaken over the course of many years, despite all of our warnings and calls to disembark from that path, which is leading to catastrophe for that country. Today, this catastrophe is absolutely clear to all who, seeking to save their own skin, and the head of the Kiev regime who brought them to power. They are trying to undermine the efforts to establish a long-term peace in Ukraine. This country is not only has a large-scale corruption, complete lawlessness, but also egregious double standards, which the collective West and media outlets under their control demonstrate in the Ukrainian context. Nowhere in the world, in no other context, has there been such consistent disregard for the indisputable violations of international humanitarian law by the Kiev regime, who have been using civilians as human shields and placing air defense systems in direct proximity to residential areas. This is resulting in tragedies linked to wreckage falling on homes from errant air defense missiles, which in any other which would not have happened because of Russian aerospace capabilities, as was repeatedly seen, are carrying out purely high-precision strikes targeting objects related to military and industrial capabilities of the Kiev regime. Moreover, in the majority of cases, these are responses to Ukrainian drone strikes targeting civilian objects in Russian cities, deliberately shelling Ukrainian deliberate shelling by Ukrainian nationalists of homes, schools, kindergartens, and hospitals, which people in the West are attempting not to notice. Unfortunately, this is also being indulged by the UN Secretariat, where any allegations from Kiev are supported, and the grim statistics which have been presented by Russia are disregarded. And this is an egregious violation of Article 100 of the UN Charter, which instructs UN staff to be objective. And this policy brings no honor to Antonio Guterres. It is clear to all that the EU and NATO are in a sticky situation with their anti-Russian Ukrainian project. They're confused and entangled, and they don't really know how to extricate themselves from the situation which they themselves placed themselves in. Washington was the first to see the light after the new administration took up its duties. However, instead of joining the efforts to establish peace in Brussels and allied capitals, they continue due to either inertia or deliberately to fan the flames of the war continuously without any justification. They are mendaciously portraying Russia as a enemy, which inevitably will attack them as soon as it finishes off Ukraine. Today, this party of war lost sleep, trying to derail to undermine the results and understandings that were arrived at during the meeting of the Russian and U.S. presidents in Alaska 1 month ago, generating hysteria, including in this chamber in connection with the unsubstantiated allegations about the incursion into Poland of alleged Russian drones and alleged overflight in Estonia of Russian fighter jets. This is a brainwashing and indoctrination, attempts to blame Russia for their shortcomings and errors, and for their acute socioeconomic problems, which European communities. Which European societies face as a result of their own ill-conceived sanctions measures, only to be compared to the designs of German and Italian the Germans and the Italians during the Second World War. This is what this can be compared to. And this manipulations, and these manipulators, having learned a bitter lesson from history, throw up their hands and allege that they did not recognize what would happen as a result of their actions. Mr. President, the contours of the future peace in Ukraine are well known to all of us. And also what is clear is that the presentation of the Kiev regime about how this will look has nothing to do with reality, merely dooming thousands of Ukrainian citizens who do not wish to go to the front, dooming them to pointless death. Just yesterday on a Ukrainian television channel, one of the then propagandists lamented that many Ukrainians there were many Ukrainians rounded up on the streets, but they, I quote, they ran out quickly. And therein lies the cynical essence of the Kiev regime. Do you align yourselves with them when it comes to this an enviable plight of Ukrainian citizens who are still alive? If you are not indifferent to the plight of these people, then we are awaiting your support and genuine efforts in order to attempt to probe the contours of a realistic long-term, lasting peace to end this war which the criminal clique began in 2014. We are not abandoning any negotiations formats. We advocate purely serious, substantive, clear-sighted negotiations, nor are we rejecting negotiations with Ukraine, despite the highly dubious, to put it mildly, legitimacy of its current authorities. The optimal format for this has already been identified, that is negotiations platform in Istanbul, and the rest will be set out after experts lay down their groundwork. And unfortunately, there's a long road ahead. To conclude, I wish to recall the prophetical words which were uttered on the sidelines of High-Level Week of the General Assembly 2 years ago by Polish President Andrzej Duda. And I quote, "Ukraine is like a drowning man. It is dragging us into the depths." End of quote. Today, such drowning men are many of those who spoke in this chamber. If you accept this inglorious fate, then you can continue to do nothing and continue in the same vein. If not, then there's a great deal of work which lies ahead. We stand ready to do this work, and now it is up to you to make that choice. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Petro Pavel, President of the Czech Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies. It is an honor to address again the Security Council, and I thank the Korean Presidency for this opportunity. The Czech Republic is proud to be among the founding nations of this esteemed organization and remains fully committed to upholding the Charter and the rules-based international order. For more than 11 years, these principles have been under direct assault by Russia's ongoing aggression against Ukraine, which continues to suffer daily attacks against civilians, infrastructure, and even a foreign diplomatic mission. Russia, for everyone to see, does not seek a peace. Let me state it loud and clear that Russia continues to violate basic principles of the UN Charter, territorial integrity and national sovereignty through its naked attempt to land grab and expansion of sphere of influence. The recent land swap proposals and continued military escalation highlight its disregard for peace and international law. While Russia pretends readiness for dialogue and negotiating process, it systematically breaches the very basic principles of peaceful coexistence among the nations and continues to play for time. And it will continue to do so for as long as the international community allows it. We condemn in the strongest terms possible the recent incursion of Russian drones into Polish airspace. And it was not an isolated incident. It forms part of Russia's deliberate strategy to intimidate its neighbors and test the limits of international law. Czechia stands in full solidarity with Poland, Estonia or Romania and commends their swift and decisive defensive response in the face of this blatant act of aggression. After many years of war, Ukrainians are the ones who want peace in their country the most. Therefore, Ukraine must be a key actor at the peace talks. Any peace agreement must be based on international law, including the UN Charter, and be subject to Ukraine's consent. The aggressor must not be rewarded for unlawful use of force. Accountability and full reparations for the damage caused are essential for a just and lasting peace. Ladies and gentlemen, there can be no doubt Russia's aggressive behavior cannot be appeased. It must be faced with strength and a resolute global response. We call on all members of the international community, and in particular on China, to assume their responsibility and stop enabling this divisive war of aggression, which risks escalating further and undermining global peace. Thank you for your attention.
Thank His Excellency Mr. Pavel for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Peter Pellegrini, President of the Slovak Republic.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, first I want to thank Republic of Korea for putting Ukraine on the agenda of this week's Security Council meeting. As a neighboring country, Slovakia is very concerned about the situation in Ukraine. Even though Slovakia and Republic of Korea are geographically distant, we both recognize the wide-ranging effects of this war. Its consequences extend beyond Ukraine and affect global peace, security, and justice. 80 years ago, the UN Charter was created to prevent anyone from imposing their will on their sovereign neighbors or taking territory by force. We must stand firmly against such actions. We have given the Security Council the important responsibility to maintain peace and security and to uphold the Charter. Yet, the war in Ukraine has been ongoing for over 1,300 days. This is not just a European issue. It concerns us all. For a long time, we believed that meetings like this would not be necessary. We must consistently defend the UN Charter to ensure that such behavior does not happen again in the future, anywhere in the world. It is our duty to do everything we can to end this conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, as a country with a war right at our border, Slovakia sees the heavy toll it takes: civilian casualties, destruction of infrastructure, and violations of humanitarian law. This war has serious implications for my region and European security. Despite direct talks between President Trump and President Putin in Alaska, there has been no ceasefire or peace agreement. Although there were hopes for diplomatic talks and negotiations, the war continues. Russia refuses to stop fighting, forcing Ukraine to defend itself its people and its borders. Recently, there have been troubling incidents involving our allies. Just 2 weeks ago, Russian drones violated the airspace of Poland, our neighbor and ally. I want to express my strong support and solidarity with Poland, as well as with Estonia and Romania. An open door to negotiations should not be seen as a weakness or a call for more violence. It is not surprising that measures are being taken in response to threats to our shared security. Slovakia has consistently called for a quick and peaceful resolution to the war in Ukraine, including direct talks with Ukraine, the country most affected. We are ready to help and support guarantees for a lasting peace that aligns with the UN Charter and resolutions. President Trump has tried to step up and to move from discussions to actions, and he is still trying. The whole international community should continue to pursue peace resolutions to the war in 3 points. First, end of fighting. Second, mediated negotiations between Ukraine and Russia for a peace agreement. And 3, security guarantees for Ukraine, those that would sustain the cause of peace in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank His Excellency Mr. Pellegrini for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Alexander Stubb, President of the Republic of Finland.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm addressing the Security Council on behalf of the Nordic states, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Denmark, and Finland. And I'm probably given the honor to do this because Finland shares a 1,340-kilometer border with Russia. Now, the Security Council has had Ukraine on its agenda for the last 11 years, with a few results on paper and even less on the ground. At the same time, it's quite clear that the General Assembly has overwhelmingly, on several occasions, condemned the aggression of Russia. The Council was entrusted with the primary responsibility to maintain international peace and security, and I think it's quite safe to say that we have failed in that. Ordinary Ukrainian civilians, and actually Russians as well, are paying a high price for this. Now, quite often I hear words that we need to eradicate the root cause of this war. The root cause is very simple. The root cause is that Russia is not abiding by this, the UN Charter. It's really as simple as that. It is trying to violate the independence, the sovereignty, and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Now, the UN Charter lays out the principles that underpin multilateralism. These principles, in my mind, are universal. Every country has taken a sovereign decision to uphold them when joining the UN. They are the minimum common rules at the core of the whole international system. We heard that in a speech from the Secretary General today, and we heard it from the President of the General Assembly. Now, the prohibition of the use of force, sovereign equality, and territorial integrity are fundamental to our coexistence. These rules are violated daily by the Russian Federation in Ukraine. Russia's war of aggression violates the very essence of who we are. It violates the very essence of the UN Charter. If we allow borders to be changed by the use of force, it will set a precedent with global implications. And I look around the room here today, I think most of us have had the experience throughout our history of war as a means of expansion. We've either been the victims thereof or we've been the aggressor. And I always felt that after 1945, we should have all learned our lesson. And many of us probably believe that after 1989 that lesson had been learned and we'd be moving towards some kind of eternal peace. But the truth is that when we don't nurture the international institutions that are the foundations of the peace, like the United Nations, we fail. I think a just peace is in our shared interests, and the solution is quite simple. It's in two phases. The first phase is a ceasefire. Ukraine has accepted it. The United States has proposed it. Europe supports it, but there's only one country that doesn't want a ceasefire, and that is Russia. And the second phase is very simple. You go into peace negotiations. And peace negotiations can last a long time, but they are indeed the only way we can get out of this. It's in our interest to ensure that the peace is sustainable and without a relapse. President Zelensky has repeatedly called for a ceasefire and high-level negotiations, and Moscow's response has been more missiles and drones. I think the message to my Russian colleagues around this table is it's time to talk about peace. But there are too many people dying as a cause of this conflict. I personally think that today could be a game changer for many reasons. One of them was President Trump's post on Truth Social, which I didn't think left any space for interpretation. It was a clear message that it's time to end this war. And I think Secretary Rubio noted that President Trump is running out of patience. Now, of course, Russia is not operating alone, so we urge all states directly or indirectly supporting the invasion to stop. We live in an era with increasing geopolitical tension and hardening rhetoric in international relations. I think we need to be clear. Might does not make right. Borders cannot be moved by force. Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, Luhansk, Crimea, and Sevastopol are Ukrainian. Membership in this council comes with power, but it also comes with responsibility. Please use that power to stop the killing and pave the way for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, for the sake of all of us. And let me finish by quoting my mentor, President Martti Ahtisaari, who was a big friend of the United Nations and received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2008. He said that what humans begin, they can also end. Please end this war. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Stubb for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Alar Karis, President of the Republic of Estonia.
President of the Security Council, Excellencies, I speak on behalf of Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and my own country, Estonia. We thank the Presidency for convening us at this crucial moment for international peace and security. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine constitutes one of the gravest breaches of international law and the UN Charter since its adoption 80 years ago. Despite repeated calls by the General Assembly to stop the aggression, Russia continues its brutal assault on the Ukrainian nation, which began with the illegal occupation of annexation of Crimea in 2014 and continued with a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This is totally incompatible not only with the status and responsibilities of a permanent member of a Security Council, but also with those of any UN member state. The scale of human tragedy Russia has inflicted in Ukraine is unimaginable. Millions of homes have been destroyed and families torn apart. Tens of thousands of children have been abducted and deported to Russia, subjugated to so-called re-educational programs with their roots and identity are systematically erased. We continue to call on Russia to grant full access for the UN and independent monitors to the occupied territories, to the prisoner of war camps in Russia, and to the areas under occupation. Russia must return the deported children. Russia must release all civilian detainees. In response to the recent peace effort by the United States, Russia has only intensified its campaign of terror against Ukrainians. Russia has not held back even from targeting and damaging diplomatic facilities in clear violation of the Vienna Convention. The recent violations of Estonian, Polish, and Romanian airspace by Russia are yet another escalation and a stark reminder that Russia's aggression threatens not only Ukraine, but the security of the entire region. On Monday, the Emergency Security Council meeting was convened to discuss the grave violation of Estonia's territorial integrity by Russian armed fighter jets. Allow me to thank all 50+ countries who called out Russia's action as dangerous, reckless, and in violation of international law. President, Russia is not interested in peace and security, neither in Ukraine nor in Europe. In March 2025, President Zelensky agreed to a 30-day ceasefire proposal. That was 6 months ago. Russia, on the other hand, has shown no intention of agreeing to a ceasefire, let alone a lasting peace. Russia's objective remains unchanged: subjugation of all the Ukraine and the reshaping of European security order to satisfy Russia's own neo-colonial and imperial ambitions. The only viable way forward towards a ceasefire and ultimately towards lasting peace in Ukraine is to collectively increase international pressure to force Russia to just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Ukrainians have courageously defended not only the country, but the core principles enshrined in UN Charter: sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. These principles are non-negotiable and cannot be compromised, as they form the very foundation of international law-based multilateral system. The Baltic states' message is clear. Russia and its leadership must be held accountable for the crime of aggression, for the war crimes and crimes against humanity. There can be no lasting peace without accountability. Without accountability, there can be no justice. And without justice, there cannot be lasting peace. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. In accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter, Ukraine has the inherent right to defend itself against Russia's armed aggression. Defending Ukraine's freedom means for us defending the sovereign equality of all member states, large and small, the core principles of which the United Nations was founded. We call on the Security Council to act. The cost of inaction is borne not only by Ukraine, but by the credibility of the international community as a whole. We urge all UN member states to increase pressure on Russia by strengthening sanctions or providing greater political, military, and humanitarian support to Ukraine. Impunity, appeasement, and further concessions would only embolden the aggressor and would lead to new crimes and escalation by Russia. Therefore, it remains our common duty to support Ukraine in its legitimate pursuit of comprehensive, just, and lasting peace, a peace rooted firmly in international law. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Karas for the statement, and I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Antonio Costa, President of the European Council.
Mr. President, first of all, I would like to thank South Korea Presidency to convey this meeting. Ukraine is fighting for the very principles of the United Nations Charter: sovereignty, territorial integrity, the respect of the international recognized borders, the right to choose its own destiny. We cannot rewrite history. This war started with an unjustified and illegal attack by Russia. There is the only one root cause to this war: Russia's refusal to accept Ukraine's right to choose its own future. Peace in Ukraine is not just Ukraine's interest, is not just Europe's interest. It is the interest of the global community. If we accept Russia's invasion of Ukraine, no country will ever be safe. The pursuit of peace must be the top priority of the global community. The European Union will continue to work to end this war of aggression and to support Ukraine in every way. A ceasefire, to which Ukraine has already agreed to, is the first step. And I call on Russia, a permanent member of this Security Council, to agree to come to the negotiation table, to stop the killings, to stop the destruction, to stop threatening the neighboring countries. I call on the international community to be actively engaged on peace efforts in full respect of the United Nations Charter. The European Union supports President Trump's efforts for peace, and I would like to see China, also a permanent member of the Security Council, contribute towards a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, to achieve an end to the aggression, the European Union will continue to apply pressure on Russia through sanctions. To ensure a lasting peace, the European Union, in the context of the coalition of the willing, is ready to contribute with concrete security guarantees to Ukraine and to fulfill the aspirations of Ukraine people. We will continue to support Ukraine on its path to full membership in the European Union. Mr. President, the time for peace, it's now, and it is now time for Russia to stop this aggression. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Costa for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Pedro Sanchez Perez Castejon, President of the Government of Spain.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the Korean presidency for convening this meeting on Ukraine, because one of the priorities of the Security Council must be to ensure that peace comes to Ukraine once and for all. And unfortunately, after 3.5 years of conflict, we remain stuck at the same crossroads, without significant progress towards a lasting solution. We have said it countless times, but I think it's important that we don't forget it. Russia's aggression against Ukraine constitutes an unacceptable violation of international law and of the values we share as an international community. This aggression is especially alarming because it has been perpetrated by a permanent member in this very chamber of the Security Council, the body responsible, supposedly, for safeguarding global peace and stability. If we allow force and coercion to replace dialogue and mutual respect, then we will be setting a dangerous precedent that will jeopardize the stability of borders and also the international order, particularly in Europe, but also in other regions of the world. Let me spell this out as clearly as I can. Any peace agreement that may be reached must be firmly anchored in respect for international law and the Charter of the United Nations. So we cannot accept solutions that imply the legitimization of violence or the change by force of internationally recognized borders. If we renege on these principles, we will not only betray the trust of the peoples that we represent, but we will also be opening the door to new crises and conflicts in the future. When it comes to my country, Spain, from day one, we have been a firm defender of Ukraine's freedom and security. We are part of the coalition of the willing. We have sent billions of euros to Kyiv in military and humanitarian aid, and we've trained more than 8,000 Ukrainian soldiers, and we've welcomed more than 240,000 displaced Ukrainians into our country. Ukraine has also repeatedly demonstrated to members of the Security Council its willingness to commit to a ceasefire and to seek a negotiated solution to this war. Yet the response of the President of the Russian Federation, Mr. Putin, has been time and again an escalation of violence and the launching of new attacks, ignoring the appeals of the international community and worsening the suffering of the civilian population that is innocent. The recent bombings deliberately targeting civilians and essential infrastructure in Ukraine, hospitals, schools, power grids, and the water supply system are further proof, clear proof, that Russia currently has no intention whatsoever of achieving peace with Ukraine. The violations of European airspace in recent days are absolutely unacceptable. And the international community must act with determination and in unity, using all political and diplomatic and humanitarian tools at our disposal to put an end to this tragedy and lay the foundations for a sustainable solution. During this high-level week, let us reaffirm together our commitment to peace, justice, and respect for international law, because we cannot allow indifference or fatigue to render us inactive. We must remember that the defense of international law and of human rights, let me repeat that, human rights, is a shared responsibility, and it is only through solidarity and cooperation that we can guarantee a safe and dignified future for the generations of tomorrow. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Sanchez Perez Castejon for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Rick Frieden, Prime Minister of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Benelux countries, Belgium, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and my own country, Luxembourg. I thank the colleagues, Prime Ministers of Belgium and the Netherlands, to be here with me to underline the importance we as Benelux countries attach to the peace and security in Ukraine. For over 3 years now, we and the overwhelming majority of United Nations member states have been calling on Russia to end its illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. Russia must stop this war immediately, as already stated forcefully also by the International Court of Justice in March 2022. In this war, Russia is the aggressor, and Ukraine has a legitimate right to defend itself in line with Article 51 of our UN Charter. Last February, this Council adopted a resolution imploring a swift end to the conflict and urging a lasting peace between Ukraine and Russia. As a permanent member of this Council, Russia has a special responsibility to uphold the UN Charter, international law, and global stability. In reality, Russia is challenging the very principles of the United Nations. Therefore, Russia's aggression not only undermines Ukraine's security and Europe's security as a whole, it affects the entire international community. Mr. President, for years, the people of Ukraine have bravely stood up against daily indiscriminate bombings and killings by Russia's armed forces. Countless civilians have died. Entire neighborhoods and cities have been destroyed. Thousands of Ukrainian children have been abducted. These kids must be brought back immediately. The Benelux countries reiterate their strongest possible condemnation of this war started by President Putin. Our message to Russia remains clear and simple. Stop attacking Ukraine and withdraw your troops. The Benelux countries underline their unwavering support for Ukraine. We remain steadfast in our support for comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine, in line with our charter. Any peace must be just, not imposed, not partial, and not forgetting the victims and the suffering endured. There must be accountability for all the crimes committed. We welcome the peace efforts led by President Trump. Despite intense diplomacy by the United States, Ukraine, the European Union, and other partners, however, there are no signs that Russia's goal of subjugating Ukraine has changed. On the contrary, while Ukraine has repeatedly stated its readiness for an immediate ceasefire and for meaningful peace negotiations, Russia keeps targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. Russia's reckless behavior was evident in the last 2 weeks when it repeatedly violated NATO airspace. These dangerous provocations, which are violating international law, demonstrate that if Russia's aggression remains unchecked, it is bound to repeat itself and expand. Mr. President, the relentless war of aggression waged by the Russian Federation has only strengthened our resolve. With our allies and partners, the Benelux countries will continue to pursue coordinated political, military, humanitarian, and financial support to Ukraine in order to bolster its efforts to defend itself, rebuild the country, and pursue a just peace. To our Ukrainian friends, we reiterate our unwavering commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders, and our full solidarity with the brave people of Ukraine in their fight for freedom. And to Russia, we say, it's time to stop this war, for peace, for your children and ours. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Frieden for the statement. And I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Antonio Tajani, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the Republic of Italy.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The Italian goal is very clear: a just and lasting peace. Our priority is the respect of the international law. We stand, of course, with Ukraine, fighting to defend their freedom and sovereignty. This is a key priority at the United Nations, in the G7, and in the European Union. I want to make this point very clear. We are not at war with Russia. Our goal is to bring Russia to the negotiation table for a just peace. We are fully convinced that a path to peace is still possible. Like Pope Leo said, we cannot abandon the hope for peace. We fully support the efforts of President Trump to reach a negotiated and fair solution to the conflict. To this end, we urge Russia to cease its attack and follow up on the summit in Alaska. It is time to start direct negotiations with Ukraine. Italy strongly supports this political process. We all need to support it. This is the key to end this conflict. Je souhaite maintenant m'adresser directement à mes collègues.
My colleagues and partner countries, it is high time for us to pool our efforts for a just peace. You will always find an attentive ear in Rome. At the same time, we hope that Russia will soon send messages for cooperation. In this context, the recent violations of Polish, Romanian, and Estonian airspace are unacceptable. These are bad messages, but we need to avoid escalation. We remain alarmed related to the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant security and safety. We need to continue to support the efforts, and we will continue to support the efforts of Mr. Grossi, Director General of the IAEA. Any lasting solution to the conflict needs to include robust security guarantees for Ukraine. There's also a critical need for, and no decision pertaining to Ukraine to be taken without Ukraine. The future of Ukraine is in the European Union.
The conference on the recovery of Ukraine that we organized in Rome in June collected more than 10 billion euros. And from Rome, we sent out a message to the world. We believe in the future of Ukraine all together. We will continue to provide particular attention to the cultural goods of Ukraine. Italy will help to rebuild, for example, the emblematic buildings of Odessa, and we will be making available our best skills to them. And we also need to concentrate on the humanitarian aspects of the war. This is a very strong message that was confirmed to me in a meeting with Pope Leo a few weeks ago. Peace also means justice. We must guarantee accountability for those responsible for crimes and full reparations for the victims. We must protect Ukrainian children that must return to their families and to their homeland without further delay. The release of prisoners of war, together with the return of Ukrainian children, are crucial priorities. We will be working with you, and Italy will do everything that it can to defend the sovereignty of Ukraine and work for peace, work for common ground between Ukraine and Russia so that we can end up with lasting peace. Thank you.
His Excellency Mr. Tajani for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
is an act of injustice and inhumanity. Therefore, we are convinced that the assets of Afghanistan frozen by Western countries in the amount of $9 billion must be returned to the Afghan people as soon as possible. These funds could contribute to the restoration of infrastructure, expansion of access to credit through local banks, the development of agriculture, and the creation of new opportunities for millions of people living in poverty. According to the UN data, in 2025, 15 million people in Afghanistan faced hunger and 24 million required humanitarian assistance. As we all know, at the beginning of September, more than 2,000 of our Afghan brothers lost their lives as a result of an earthquake. Tragically, due to lack of financial resources and weak infrastructure, timely assistance could not be provided to those affected. We call upon the leaders of Western countries to immediately return these assets for the sake of future of the Afghan people. If you truly want the Afghan people to overcome poverty, hunger, as soon as possible, return them without delay. Only then will your words about human rights and interstate obligations correspond to your actions. Distinguished participants, today's challenges in African countries from conflicts to food insecurity require not sympathy in words, but solidarity in action. Africa is 54 countries with a population of more than 1.5 billion people. It is the second largest continent after Eurasia. Africa possesses enormous reserves of resources, and we are confident that in the near future Africa's role in the global economy and international politics will multiply several times. Therefore, the continent's colossal natural wealth must serve the accelerated development of Africa itself and the fulfillment of its own interests. The peacekeeping work of the UN must be strengthened. My country began sending its peacekeepers on UN missions at the dawn of its independence in the early 1990s. This once again proves that we are sincerely wish to contribute to the cause of strengthening peace and security in the world. The contribution of a state should not be determined by its size, but by the depth of its commitment and sincere desire for peace and solidarity. We support the strengthening of international treaties, including the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. It is important to educate the younger generation to perceive a world without nuclear weapons. It is essential to raise awareness among young people about the devastating consequences of weapons of mass destruction. The International Day for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Awareness, initiated by Kyrgyzstan and supported by the UN member states, is an excellent platform for implementing this concept. Kyrgyzstan is one of the initiators and the depository of Treaty on Nuclear Weapon-Free Zones in Central Asia. We have acceded to all fundamental international instruments on disarmament and non-proliferation, including the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. In line with the principles of consistency, this year the Kyrgyz Republic made the political decision to sign the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We firmly believe that our planet must exist without nuclear weapons. This human invention must be used solely for peaceful purposes. Ladies and gentlemen, for sustainable development and regional integration, the countries of Central Asia require equal dialogue and active cooperation. Despite complex historical and geographic factors, Kyrgyzstan has peacefully resolved its border issues with neighboring countries, in particular Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. This process involved lengthy negotiations and at high political levels, expert levels, and was resolved with due respect for the interests of all sides. I can state with confidence that today the borders between Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan are borders of friendship, trade, and cooperation. This experience confirms that peace is possible where there is political will, respect, and dialogue, which enabled us to resolve existing contradictions and embark on a path of creation and development. Kyrgyzstan is ready to share this experience of resolving complex issues with the international community. Let us use the more than $3 trillion that are spent annually on armaments worldwide to improve people's lives, eradicate hunger, protect our environment, and clean the air. After all, there are no borders when it comes to breathing air. We all breathe the same air. Therefore, I call on us to live not in a race for who has the most powerful weapons, but in a competition for whose country has the cleanest nature and air. Dear friends, climate change is a reality we are witnessing today. We face threats of drought, melting glaciers, changes in ecosystems, and loss of biodiversity. Kyrgyzstan, as a mountainous country, is particularly vulnerable to these changes. We are already experiencing the threat of declining water resources and risks to agriculture and biodiversity. Although Kyrgyzstan is landlocked, it actively participates in international environmental initiatives and can play a significant role in supporting agreements aimed at protecting global ecosystems. The Kyrgyz Republic consistently advocates for recognition of the interconnection of natural systems from mountains to oceans, which are two poles of a single system. The future of the oceans begin on the mountaintops. In this context, we ratified the agreement on conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity and became among the first 60+ countries to join the agreement. Rivers that sustain marine and coastal ecosystems originate in mountains. Thus, the protection of mountain ecosystems and the sustainable management of the oceans are interconnected. At present, the country is preparing the second Bishkek Plus 25 summit, scheduled for 2027, as a central platform for states, international organizations, and experts on sustainable development of mountain regions. We invite all of you to take an active part in this event. Dear friends, as former UN General Secretary Dag Hammarskjöld once aptly said, the UN was not created to lead humanity to heaven, but to save humanity from hell. Today, these words are more relevant than ever. The organization was born from the horrors of war, but lives and on thanks to faith in cooperation, dialogue, and respect. Now more than ever, it is important to preserve and strengthen the system of multilateralism as a shield against anarchy and unilateral decisions. There is an urgent need to develop fundamentally new international mechanisms that adequately respond to contemporary challenges and threats. Our organization needs to change. This is no longer a choice, but a requirement of time and today's realities. In this context, we support the effort of the Secretary General to reform the UN under the initiative UN 80. It is also time to improve the reform work of the UN Security Council. At present, 50 members of the Security Council effectively decide the fate of all world's states. Questions of war and peace, security and stability depend on whether they can reach a consolidated position. Moreover, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council can always block any decision. Kyrgyzstan advocates for a necessary measure to improve the UN Security Council in a way that takes into account the interest of majority of states. In this regard, it is important to achieve a compromise on all aspects of Security Council reform as soon as possible. This reform must be based on principles of universality, broad geographical representation, and wide support among UN member states. Kyrgyzstan considers it legitimate and fair to expand the rights of African states to membership in the Security Council and to eliminate historical imbalances. More than 60 member states, including Kyrgyzstan, have never been elected to the Security Council, while some countries have been elected 5 or 6 times. We think it's not fair. Distinguished delegates, Kyrgyzstan strives to make its contribution to peace, global security, and sustainable development. In order to draw the attention of the UN and the world to the challenges faced by small states, Kyrgyzstan has put forward its candidacy for non-permanent membership in the UN Security Council for the period 2027-2028. The support of countries that have never been elected to this Security Council will strengthen confidence in equality among members and thereby raise the authority of organization and reinforce trust in it. We sincerely believe in the principle of justice, and I ask UN member states to support us in the elections in June next year. Every country should have the opportunity to serve as a member of the Council and contribute to the cause of maintaining peace and security. I can confidently say that Kyrgyzstan is among those states with the experience needed to raise meaningful issues in the Security Council. We will firmly uphold international law, justice, the protection of human rights, and support the multilateral system based on mutual respect, balance of interest, and responsibility to future generations. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our challenges are shared, and our responses must be united. Our words must match our deeds. We cannot afford inaction. Peace requires effort. The future of our planet is in our shared responsibility. Thank you very much for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Kyrgyz Republic. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Gustavo Petro Urrego, President of the Republic of Colombia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
President of the General Assembly, this is my last statement as President here. It's the fourth time. In my first speech, I announced that it was very likely that there would be conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza and in Palestine, and that I suggested that there be a peace conference, but those who don't have bombs or large budgets are not heeded here. Well, 4 years later, the horrific situation in Palestine did not lead me to think that almost the same thing could happen in the Colombian Caribbean area, where unarmed young people are being shot at with missiles in the open seas. And now we are in a different situation. Perhaps it's more global, a kind of Stone Age that has descended on all of humankind. Missiles against 17 unarmed young people in the Caribbean Sea, some of them Colombians. The persecution, imprisonment, and expulsion of millions of migrants, missiles that have killed some 70,000 people in Gaza, the lack of action on the climate crisis. All this is linked, and all this has the same cause. Migration is simply an excuse so that a rich society, rich, white, and racist, believes itself to be the superior race and is not realizing that its leaders are leading it to the abyss, to its own distinction, together with the rest of humanity. They said that the missiles in the Caribbean were used to stop drug trafficking. That is a lie. Stated here in this very rostrum. In 2023 and 2024 were years when the largest amount of cocaine was seized, and over 700 drug traffickers were extradited to the United States and Europe. I extradited them, and my government seized, confiscated the cocaine, and we didn't shoot a single missile, nor did we kill any youths. The years where I was able to prove that it's more effective to substitute coca crops than eradicate them, than forced eradication using poison, and forcing peasants to use it. The violent war against drugs was a failure, and I replaced it with an effective anti-trafficking policy, not based on a mix-up between an inert substance, that is drugs, with people who actually use it and practice it. But what was necessary is to destroy dialogue and to shoot missiles. Was it really necessary on unarmed, poor young people in the Caribbean? The anti-drug policy is not meant to stop cocaine that is coming to the United States. The anti-drug policy is to dominate the peoples of the South as a whole. You shouldn't look at the drugs, you should look at who has the power and who dominates. This is why I speak to you as a decertified president. I've been decertified by President Trump, without him having any right to do this, a human right or divine right or any sensible reason. They want to force by violence tens of thousands of peasants to do what the U.S. government wants to do, which are influenced by mafia groups in Colombia. Thousands of peasants are massacred in Colombia by politicians who were senators, who were presidents, who were ministers, that were bribed and on the payroll of the drug mafia. And at the same time, they were allies of the extreme right based in Florida of the United States, and now allies of the Trump administration. They've been allied for decades with drug lords, cocaine drug lords in Colombia. They were allies, and so they led this anti-drug policy from Washington. I don't know if Trump even knows that his foreign policy towards Colombia, Venezuela, and towards the Caribbean is based on advice from Colombians who are allies of the cocaine mafia. I myself denounced these politicians, including the paramilitaries, drug traffickers, naming them by their names in the Congress of Colombia when I was senator, and many times they wanted to kill me because of that. And they did not want me to become president. They wanted me to shut up. And now they don't want another progressive government to be reelected. That is why I've been personally decertified, and they have spread calumny against Colombia. Colombia has confiscated the highest amount of cocaine in the history of the country under my government, and I've been decertified. In Colombia, we have managed to stop the increase in the rate of expansion of coca crops. That was 43% under the government of Duque, and has dropped to 3%. And Duque was not decertified. He was who had someone who financed his campaign, who was a drug trafficker, and instead they've decertified me. So the anti-drug policy is not aimed at the public health of a society, but rather to prop up a policy of domination. They don't want to give the power to the people. The young people that were killed using missiles in the Caribbean were not from Hamas. They were not from other terrorist groups. They were poor Colombians. And with apologies to those who dominate the United Nations, there should be criminal cases against those officials of the United States. for doing this, including the utmost official, President Trump, that allowed the shooting of missiles against these young people who were simply trying to escape poverty. Youths who in a speedboat who might have had a certain amount of drugs were not drug traffickers. They were simply poor youth. But the real drug traffickers live somewhere else, not in America, not in Latin America. So it's easy to shoot missiles against the speedboats with migrants and accusing them of terrorism and drug trafficking when they don't have a single weapon to defend themselves. When the real drug traffickers live in New York, here, just a few blocks from here, in Miami. And they reach agreements with the DEA. And they're allowed to traffic in Africa, in Russia, in China, but not in the United States. A country that has not managed to reduce its consumption of cocaine because it's drug addicts, or rather, they did manage to reduce the consumption of cocaine simply because their addicts switched to another type of drug, fentanyl, which is much deadlier. This fentanyl is produced in the industrial heartland of the United States, here, not far from here. And the consumers are here as well. It's produced and consumed in the United States. That is the worst. They're addicted to fentanyl and to gasoline, the two main poisons of life in the world. And gasoline is even worse than fentanyl. Only the black-skinned people here, those who are ancestral here, that were thousands of years have been here, or young people, or women who don't want to see their children die of any color of their skin. People are still hooked on fentanyl or hooked on television. Only they can stop this domination by the United States. The people who have taken to the streets in California, in New York, in Philadelphia, where the Liberty Bell stands, in spite of the National Guard that Trump sends out against its own people to shut them up, to the states that are free. These states are no longer uniting their efforts in the face of tyranny. The President of the United States does not know that 1 million Latin Americans have died. The largest share of them from Colombia. And another 1 million will die in North America in 10 years because of fentanyl. Cocaine killed 3,000 people a year today. Fentanyl kills 130 per year, 30 times more. That is the outcome of 30 years by the United States of a policy that is absurd and that is leading its society to the horrific death due to drugs that kill the brain. And in this situation, Trump not only allows missiles to be fired at young people in the Caribbean, does not only imprison migrants, but also allows missiles to be killed against children, women, and old people in Gaza. He is an accomplice to genocide. It is a genocide, and we need to prevent it. This forum is a mute witness to a genocide. In a world where we thought that this was something only a legacy of Hitler. Here they don't speak of life, of the climate crisis. What is happening is the death of thousands of children. Meanwhile, we in Colombia have not increased the rate of killings. We have the lowest unemployment rate in the country this century. We have the lowest unemployment rates. We have developed our agriculture by 10% and our industry by 5%. We have more tourists than ever who have come to see the beauties of our country, our cultural and natural beauties. And we are seeking peace by negotiating with drug traffickers and with rebels. I will always be ready to discuss, to negotiate, to save lives, and to eradicate coca crops, but based on their own voluntary decision by Colombian peasants. Let us not be bribed by the drug traffickers, as was the case in previous governments in Colombia. And 25,000 hectares have already been eradicated voluntarily. We have been successful in this new policy. It's not an anti-drug policy, but an anti-drug traffickers policy. That is something different. And we're grateful to the countries that have helped us, such as Qatar, Cuba, Mexico, Vatican, Norway, Brazil, and Venezuela. We don't want to thank those who want to sow war between us. People of the world, listen. Latin America does not only mean drug trafficking or coke or cocaine. Latin America has a massive potential for clean electrical energy, renewable alternate energy based on wind, water. The United States has a huge demand for energy, and 70% of it is filled by fossil fuels, in other words, based on carbon, coal, gas. Latin America is developing its clean energy potential, and we can satisfy the entire demand of the United States for energy. What is necessary is investment, and we would make the biggest contribution to fighting climate change. Given the huge potential for clean energy and the capacity to absorb by the Amazon, Latin America can make a tremendous contribution to save the life in this planet. All that is necessary is $600 billion to develop this potential. Africa and Europe can do the same. It is this decarbonization would provide us with over $1.3 trillion. This is money that is already in the treasuries of the United States, Europe, and China, but not a dollar is spent because it's not profitable. Or rather, it might be profitable in terms of human life, including life in the United States, in Europe, and China. However, they don't want to depend on Latin America and Africa. They know that to bring together the clean energy of Africa and Latin America would not only decarbonize the planet, save it from the climate collapse, but it would also change the global power which is discussed here. But that power is spoken in terms of bombs. But this would truly create a global democracy and change the means of production, because life and humanity would become the priorities, and they would edge out greed. Greed is the poison of life. And Mao spoke of this, Chairman Mao. According to science, we have 10 more years until we reach a point of no return in terms of the climate. And once we reach that point, we won't be able to do anything. We will simply observe the disasters, and we'll feel them in our own families and cities. Because it will be irreversible. The extinction of life, extinction of human life will be, there'll be an irreversibility of the process, and no technology, no political or social force will be able to do anything about it to stop this collapse. And we only have 10 years left. That is what science tells us. But here people don't believe in science. The most powerful man in the world does not believe in science. That is the irrationality. And Germany, the country of great philosophers, of Kant, Feuerbach, and others, became prey of irrationalism in 1933, and today it's this country that is becoming irrational. The solution is to stop consuming fossil fuels and to quickly switch to water, wind, hydrogen. But the word decarbonization sounds subversive at the conferences of the most powerful countries, the G7 or G20 or Davos, among the rich. Just as 5 centuries ago, the word democracy sounded subversive here, or in Bogota, and in Paris, and in Madrid. These dollars that I mentioned here, 600 billion or 1.3 trillion. This is significant. This is just a little more than what the rich countries pledged at the COP in Paris, and they have not fulfilled their pledges because they are not interested in decarbonization. And what has come is basically loans from multilateral banks, which are just small amounts compared to what is needed. The climate crisis means that in all public budgets, investment in decarbonization and adaptation should be the priority. A global financial policy is necessary that is different. The debt risk premium should be abolished. Which countries are the riskiest? They are the countries that have the highest greenhouse gas emissions, such as this one. These are the riskiest countries. Whereas the countries that absorb CO2, and we have jungles and a lot of water in the south, we absorb the CO2 of the north. But the market does not agree with that. So the debt of the poorest countries must be forgiven. There should be swaps, debt swaps for adaptation and mitigation and investment in the climate crisis. So people from the United States and those from Wall Street, from London, you want to collect the interest payments from the debt of our countries. What you will find eventually is cemeteries, because we'll all be dead. The money will be useless in the midst of all the cemeteries. Another subversive word is to plan. a global plan. The word plan has been forgotten because it was not necessary to plan, because to plan is anathema. And there was a fundamentalist belief in the markets, thinking that markets would bring happiness. The Swiss economist Arras said this. And in fact, the market leads to an abyss. It leads to death, as we are already witnessing today. Malras, that was his name, was wrong. Neoliberalism was mistaken from the very beginning, and it's been guiding our countries for the past 50 years based on completely erroneous formulas. The plans should be binding on national states. There should be a global democracy supervised by a Security Council that does not have the right to veto. Because we have to understand that the market will not resolve the climate crisis, because it has produced that crisis. It was capital, which is based on unequal relationship between those who own the means that create the carbon and those who work, who are salaried employees. And this is a system that has to produce more and more objects that the boss, the owner, has to sell. And the same thing for the production of fossil fuels. That is what has produced the climate crisis. Produce more, to consume more, to sell more, and thus create more carbon, more oil, until we die. But this will not last forever, because carbon and fossil fuels have reached the end, because that is perhaps will mean the end of capital in general, because if it's not the end of capital, it'll be the end of life. The owner of capital is an individual that has power. It's not a thing. It's not some kind of puppet. It is a human being with his greed, a slave to his greed. That is the individual who will seek to make sure that more and more oil is produced in their countries, even if it poisons his life, and continue to dig for more oil, even if it destroys the atmosphere and destroys life. So we have to choose either life or greed, either the Stone Age or local and global democracy, freedom or death, as Bolivar said. And that was his slogan, his red and black, white and white banner. Freedom red, death black, and possible peace white. That is what is necessary, is a revolution by the peoples of the world to overcome the climate crisis and not to allow this crisis to reach a global collapse. It is a revolution of the united peoples, of civilizations that need to engage in dialogue, more than states themselves. It is a revolution of entire humanity to save life on the planet, and perhaps with the cooperation of certain governments that want to support life. Today, the United Nations is experiencing a crisis, and there's a need to transform it. Today, we have nation-states gathered here who no longer have power, and that no matter how much they vote, they are ignored, because the nation-state has also reached its decadence, its ultimate fall. Because capital has become global. It's not contained in a state. Socialism was supposed to be global, but Stalin, in fact, in Yalta, condemned a global revolution that was occurring in Spain and in Greece, and it might have occurred in Latin America and other places. So humanity is a new political subject that has emerged rather than the nation state. And so the United Nations have to become a united humanity, even though a diverse but united humanity. A new subject is appearing in human history, and this is very important. And I think that this is wonderful because we have to overcome the idea of a nation state to become humanity, but that humanity must be united. For that, there needs to be democracy around the world. There needs to be permanent dialogue in the midst of diversity. It is our differences that compels us to coordinate our action at the global level. Dialogue, yes. Humanity, yes. Humanity profoundly democratic, yes. Hopefully, a humanity of based on leaders who are free, rather than a humanity that is basically slaves, just to beasts of burden. A humanity that shoots missiles against young people that are defenseless armed people, or shoots missiles in a place of the world near where Jesus was born. These problems cannot be resolved with governments who are bribed by oil producers, by oil corporations. So a new political subject is emerging, a united and diverse humanity, united despite its diverse cultures. Meanwhile, the old societies of Europe are collapsing, and the United States is applauding its new Hitler. It's not listening to its own young people or its older people who died in Europe in the battlefields of Europe fighting against Hitler and against his criminal ideology. Today, the same thing is being done as Hitler did, building concentration camps for migrants. It's stated that migrants are of an inferior race, and they blame them just like Hitler blamed the Jews. They call them drug traffickers and thieves, whereas the majority of drug traffickers are blonde and have blue eyes, and they keep their fortunes in the largest banks in the world, and they don't live in Bogota or in Gaza. They live in Miami. They are neighbors of President Trump. They live in Dubai or in Paris or London. They don't live where there's poverty. But the missiles are fired against those where there's poverty. Tren de Aragua is a group that is considered a terrorist group, but that is not true. Migrants are not criminals. They should not be put in concentration camps, expelled and chained up. Immigration is not immigration is due to a blockade against countries like Iraq or Cuba. Immigration is a result of the impoverishment of many countries because of their indebtedness, because of wars unleashed by the United States and Europe to grab their oil. Immigration is a consequence of a climate crisis that leaves the tropics without water and destroys the environment. The solution to migration is is very different from missiles or prisons or camps. There is no higher race. There's no supreme race. Only ignorant extremists think like that. All of humanity is made in God's image. They use immigration as a scapegoat to do nothing against the climate crisis, which will put an end to life. They use immigration to get the votes of the whites, but what is necessary is to put an end to the consumption of CO2 and oil, and stop drilling and drilling and drilling for oil. We need a different world, a humane world. And first and foremost, we need to stop the genocide in Gaza. Humanity cannot allow a single day more of this genocide, or for the genocidal Netanyahu and his allies in Europe and the United States to continue. The United Nations must uphold the decisions of the International Court of Justice. International law is the basis of civilization and of its wisdom as distilled in history, and it must make sure that the decisions of international justice are implemented, are applied. Diplomacy has been tried in Gaza. It could not resolve the situation. I'm sorry, and I'm sorry, President Macron. We can keep insisting and insisting in when every single day, every single minute, a missile is fired and destroys the bodies of babies and children in the Arab state of Palestine. Every day, there are decisions, resolutions that are vetoed in the Security Council. Every day, more and more children die. More and more bombs, more and more dead. Perhaps those who do this, who shoot this, are robots. Maybe they don't have their own children. They're not human. Can we stop the genocide with a vote of the General Assembly? Yes, that's what we should do rather than a vote in the Security Council, because that is vetoed. United for peace for Palestine. We should establish a peacekeeping force to protect. What's necessary today are words, not blue helmets that are often lack training, and they're not ready to do this. No, what we need is a powerful army of countries that do not accept genocide. That is why I invite nations of the world and their peoples, most importantly, as an integral part of humanity, to bring together weapons and armies and to defend Palestine. I invite the armies of Asia and the brave people, the brave Slavic people who defeated Hitler, and the Latin American people of Bolivar, of Garibaldi and others. I think there's enough. We've had enough words. Today, the time has come to use the slogan of Bolivar, freedom or death, because Washington and NATO are killing democracy, and they are spreading totalitarianism at the global level. We need to raise the red and black banner flag. Without forgetting the white color, which was the color of peace and the color of hope in the heart of humanity. The United States no longer teach democracy, but rather kill democracy, especially among its immigrants, filled with greed. The UN should begin its change by stopping the genocide in Gaza with a army of liberation and salvation, and there should be a decision here taken in the General Assembly without any veto. After Gaza, we can start working on decarbonization so that we can found a truly global democracy and a new Security Council can be established without any vetoes, and where its decisions would be binding, and the global and national financial system should be based on decentralized capital. That is the way that humankind can regulate capital, to subordinate capital to life, to regulate it to people. That is the path by which the United Nations will move from an alliance of states to an alliance of cultures and peoples. If we overcome the climate crisis and if we unite as humanity, we will manage to make the United Nations an assembly of peoples which seeks to make sure that every individual is free, making sure that every human being achieves their potential, and because the intelligence of human beings, illuminated by science, will make it possible to not only save life, but to fulfill the mission of humanity by expanding life into the stars. A humanity that is united and free can look at the stars and reach the stars, as the Romans, the legionnaires, thought of Judea when they used the word astra, or star. It's the time of freedom or death. Real death from missiles, but freedom is also real in the heart of human beings and its capacity to rebel and to resist. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Colombia. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Karol Nawrocki, President of the Republic of Poland. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, I like and appreciate a lot English language, but I love Polish language, which epitomizes more than 1,000 years of Polish heritage, Polish culture, and Polish history. So I would like to share with you Polish language. Szanowny
Distinguished Mr. President, Your Excellencies, esteemed delegates, I am standing here for the first time as President of the Republic of Poland. And of course, I feel great proud because of this. But at the same time, I'm aware of what serious challenges we are facing today as an international community. This is indeed so, for the world has changed completely over the last couple of years since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. On February the 24th, 2022, we were brutally, all of us, awakened from our blissful dream of a world at the end of history. The history did not finish, and the history will not finish, and we need to be aware of that. So we were awakened from our blissful dream in which we strive for universal peace and respect for the principles of international law. I believe these are the words which are repeated more frequently in this community. This dream, ladies and gentlemen, does no longer exist, and we often repeat the words which do not reflect reality which surrounds us, both in Central Europe, in Eastern Europe, and in many other regions of the world from which you have come. State borders have ceased to be untouchable, as a matter of fact, and international law, which has so far been considered the compass of the world order, began to be treated more as a suggestion rather than a rule. Let me remind you that shortly after the outbreak of the war and the attack of the Russian Federation on Ukraine, Polish men and women demonstrated incredible solidarity with the fighting Ukrainian nation. We opened our hearts, our borders, we opened up our homes. We provided material, financial, and military assistance, as well as diplomatic one. Today, ladies and gentlemen, 1 million Ukrainian refugees live in Poland. Ladies and gentlemen, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is not only the most serious conflict in Europe since World War II, but it is also a turning point. The existing international order is crumbling before our eyes. The world has entered a new and dangerous era of rivalry between great powers, breaking rules and testing how far one can go before someone says a clear enough stop. The principle of sovereignty, you can ask this question. It is increasingly trampled upon, the prohibition of aggression reduced to a dead letter. Instead of law, an attempt to use naked and brutal force. We are at a turning point in history, a time when the decisions made today will have consequences for decades to come. And all of us need to be aware of this, and all of us are taking responsibility for this. That is why now, as a community of democratic states, or those aspiring to be democratic states, we must view the current situation as a battlefield for principles whose observance may determine the future of our civilization. Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is the last moment to take concrete action. Ladies and gentlemen, Russia's aggression against Ukraine is not just a regional conflict. It is a test of whether the principles on which the UN is based will stand the test of time, or whether they will succumb to the weight of the imperial and colonial ambitions of a state which considers itself above the law and which has repeatedly ignored the resolutions of the assembly, of this assembly, of other assemblies, and to a certain extent, all of us take responsibility for that. Further repeating the words about peace and security, which have to be spoken out loud, but which should be followed by concrete action. Moscow speaks of the need to address, and I quote, the root causes of the conflict. I share this view, but I believe that the root causes of Russian aggression are primarily ideological. Russia refers to an imperial vision that treats entire nations as a colonial property. It denies them subjectivity on a regular basis, claiming that they are artificial constructs, and it justifies the invasion as a historical correction. And ladies and gentlemen, in Poland, in Central Europe, in Eastern Europe, we know all of that. We have known it for at least 86 years. It is the same set of notions which appears also in the 21st century during our discussions, plenary sessions, and assemblies. To us in Central Europe and in Eastern Europe, this set of notions is nothing new. whether we are talking about Poland, the Republic of Poland, in the first half of the 20th century, or whether we are talking about Ukraine today. As a historian, I view the present also through the lens of the past. That is natural. After centuries of conquests, wars, partitions, deportations, rapes, and crimes, in the 20th and in the 21st century, Russia has simply not abandoned its imperial ambitions. One of my great predecessors, the late President Lech Kaczynski, understood this perfectly well when he spoke in front of the Georgian parliament in 2008. His words, spoken at that time, have stood the test of time. President Lech Kaczynski said, ladies and gentlemen, today Georgia, tomorrow Ukraine, the day after tomorrow the Baltic states, and later, perhaps, it will be time for my country, for Poland. When Russia attacked Georgia, it was not clear to everyone that this was only the beginning of the Kremlin's new imperialism. Unfortunately, the wind of history, which we know and understand so well in Poland, is beginning to blow again. Once again, we are experiencing Russian imperialism also on our soil, in Poland. 2 weeks ago, on the night of September 9th to 10th, the Russian drones attacked the territory of a NATO member state, on the territory of Poland. A dozen or so drones violated my country's borders deliberately, because I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that this was not a coincidence. It happened on orders issued in the capital of a country which is a permanent member of the Security Council. As a result, for the first time since World War II, Poland was forced to open fire on hostile objects over our territory. And rest assured, ladies and gentlemen, as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and as President of Poland, that Poland will always react adequately and it stands ready to defend its territory. Poles, ladies and gentlemen, were not scared of the Soviets in 1920, and they defended the European civilization. They defended the Soviets in 1920. Polish people and the countries of Central Europe did not give up their spirit of freedom and sovereignty for 45 years of Soviet colonialism after 1945. And Polish people, as well as countries of Central and Eastern Europe, will not be scared of Russian drones either. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is not the point. The point is, how long are we going to agree to such acts of violating our international community? And that is precisely why, ladies and gentlemen, in Poland we're allocating significant amounts to develop our defense capabilities. That is why we are building the resilience of our country, but also of our part of Europe. Since the victims of similar provocations by Russia are also the Baltic states, our friends, the Estonians, for example, as well as Romania. As a leader in the region, we are working to strengthen the close ties among the Bucharest 9 countries. And that is why we are developing cooperation within the 3 Seas initiative. As the voice of the region, we emphasize that we do not consent to Moscow's ruthless acts of provocation against us and other European nations, testing our reactions and intimidating our societies. We do not agree to that. Distinguished delegates, neo-imperial and neo-colonial Russia is attempting to destroy the architecture of international security before our eyes. It violates international law, reinforces divisions, and strives to revive the concert of powers. Many countries present in this hall today are well aware of the tragedy of borders drawn by force and decisions taken over the heads of nations. Historical experiences, often so difficult for my country, shows that lasting peace cannot be built on rewarding aggression. We cannot agree to territorial integrity and sovereignty being violated. Russia's current actions do not indicate a willingness to pursue genuine peace, declarations of dialogue, and this is something we know as well, are accompanied by military offensives and more attacks, with victims being civilians, including children. Always when Moscow says peace, what it actually means is surrender of the one who it considers its enemy. Russia needs to end the war and accept full responsibility for it. Holding Russia accountable should be our common duty. The perpetrators of all international crimes must be tried before competent courts. And I hope this is going to be the case soon, and that we are going to meet in the coming years, also during my presidency, and discuss things which should be obvious for all of us. That is why Poland supports the work of the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, and endorses the idea of establishing a special ad hoc tribunal to try the perpetrators of aggression. For no war can be profitable for the aggressors. Wars cannot pay off to the aggressors, also in terms of economy. States and nations deserve full compensation also from those who started the Second World War. Because if we want to build a community of states, of democratic states, a common European Union, then we have to agree together that war must not pay off in terms of economy to any aggressor. Ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned, we are currently facing a whole range of global and local challenges. The eyes of the world, and ours too, are currently looking at the Middle East. Poland, like many other countries in the world, is following with concern the situation in this region, in the Middle East, where, as a result of the brutal attacks by Hamas on October the 7th, 2023, the conflict has escalated. Israel, like any other country, has the right to self-defense. Actions undertaken by Israel, however, must comply with international law, including international humanitarian law. Poland continues to advocate for a two-state solution to the conflict in the Middle East, in such a way as to give both the Palestinians and the Israelis the right to live in peace and security. Poland consistently supports international efforts to improve the situation in the Middle East and calls on the UN to take action. Ladies and gentlemen, Poland has no colonial past, which is why we are a reliable and trustworthy partner for Asian and African countries. What is more, we ourselves, we Poles, were victims of colonial policies pursued by superpowers, so we understand perfectly well the instruments used by neo-imperial powers, and we do not consent to them destabilizing certain regions of the world. As President of the Republic of Poland, I will pay particular attention to developing our cooperation with various regions of the world. I'm referring to the African continent. We can all see how the ongoing wars, conflicts, and terrorist attacks undermine the efforts of proud African nations to live and develop in safe and just conditions. The world must stand with all those affected by insecurity and help them restore peace. We do not consent to neo-imperial powers destabilizing, for instance, the Sahel, in order to arbitrarily manage global migration flows or apply migratory pressure. Nor do we consent to international criminal groups profiting from human trafficking, and slave labor. We also want, and it is obvious as Poland, to develop relations with the countries of Asia and the Pacific. The role of this region in shaping the international order in the 21st century has significantly grown. This dynamic economic development is, however, accompanied by growing geopolitical tensions, which affects stability, prosperity, and security also in other regions of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, as Polish people, we are concerned about the negative impact of global crises. But as President of Poland, I want to say openly here in front of this international community that we are also deeply concerned and we are aware of the mistakes made by our Western partners, friends, and neighbors. Yes, I agree with President Donald Trump that in recent years, and that is something that we were warning against as Poles, and this was the signal sent also by Central European countries, Eastern European countries. Europe is deep in ideological madness. This led to bad decisions on migration. This led to green craziness, green madness, the Green Deal, which is destroying economic markets and also agricultural markets. Yes, the very same Europe, our friends and our partners with whom we want to build a common European Union. For many years, we're subsidizing the Russian Federation buying Russian cheap gas. Ladies and gentlemen, in Poland as well as in Central Europe, we know all of that, and we are glad whenever the leaders of the European countries, Western European countries, draw conclusions and when they listen to our voice. Ladies and gentlemen, development and humanitarian aid are an integral part of our country's foreign policy in terms of building global peace, security, and development. We see it as a joint investment in our future, security, stability, and prosperity. We are present with our support in many areas in Africa, in Eastern Europe, and in the Middle East. Distinguished delegates, Poland, a co-founder of the United Nations, is the world's 20th largest economy, and a country which has successfully transformed itself over the past 30 years from a developing country into a developed country and from a centrally planned economy into a market economy. This unique experience allows us to make a significant contribution to UN discussions on development, combining the perspectives of the global East and the global West, as well as North and South. Given our potential and experience, we consistently seek to participate in the works of the G20, a format that serves as a bridge in these turbulent times. We also hope that the invitation to cooperate and to participate in the next summit of the group issued by the United States of America, for which I'm grateful to President Donald Trump, will translate into Poland's permanent presence in this community. Ladies and gentlemen, human rights are one of the three main pillars on which the United Nations system is based. We cannot talk about true peace if we do not protect human rights of everyone, of every person without exception. Peace is not only an absence of armed conflicts, it is also justice, equality, and respect for human dignity. Therefore, the protection of human rights must be a priority in any process of building peace and security. We can clearly see dramatic consequences of the Russian aggression, also in terms of human rights and humanitarian issues. Our priority, the priority of Poland, of Polish people, is also the situation of human rights in Belarus. We must firmly defend human rights also in the most fundamental dimension. I'm speaking about the right to life of the defenseless, from conception to natural death. We are protecting our families as the place of happiness, love, and bringing up children. We are speaking up as Poland in a loud voice for one of the most persecuted groups in the world, Christians. We consider the Human Rights Council to be the main human rights body within the United Nations system, playing a key role in ensuring compliance with human rights standards. That is why Poland has submitted its candidacy for membership of the Human Rights Council for the period 2029-2031. Our candidacy reflects our commitment to promoting and protecting human rights around the world. Distinguished Mr. President, Your Excellencies, esteemed delegates, the United Nations was established 80 years ago. This anniversary shows how far we have come, but also how many challenges still lie ahead. Today we know that international cooperation is not an option, it is a necessity for all of us. It is unacceptable that aggressors begin to march with impunity through other people's territories and perpetrators of war crimes sleep peacefully without accountability every day. Let me remind you that after World War II, there was no room for relativizing crimes, at least in case of the most important commanders who gave orders. There was Nuremberg. There was a court, there was a name and a family name, there was a charge and a sentence, because it was not just about revenge, it was about principles. And today it's also about principles to make sure that crime is not rewarded and that the law is never replaced by force. Today, we must return to that spirit. We must build an international system of accountability that will not hesitate to call evil by its name, regardless of the flag it bears on its shoulder. We must make it clear there are borders, there are human rights, there is international law, and anyone who violates it should face severe consequences. But it is not going to happen by itself, ladies and gentlemen, for the world order is not given once and for all. It depends precisely on us, on the governments, institutions, but most importantly, on societies. As one of the Nobel Peace Prize laureates once said, neutrality helps the oppressor always, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Let these words be not just a warning, but also a call to action. To action here and now. Thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Poland. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Daniel Francisco Chapo, President of the Republic of Mozambique. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you so much. Your Excellency, Madam President of the 81st session of the United Nations General Assembly, Your Excellency, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellency, heads of state and the government present here, distinguished head of delegations, ladies and gentlemen, it is for us an honor to address for the first time as the President of the Republic of Mozambique in a very important moment, both for Mozambique and for the Organization of the United Nations. I'm saying this because we celebrate 50 years of our national independence, 50 years of our admission as full members of the UN, and 80 years of these big organizations. Therefore, we would like to congratulate the President, Her Excellent Madam Annalene Baerbock, for her presidency of the 80th session, as well as commend the work of the outgoing President, His Excellency Philemon Yang, that did a wonderful work. We cannot fail to pay tribute to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Engineer Antonio Guterres, for his tireless advocacy in the defense of multilateralism, for the attention to Africa's priorities, and for his vision in launching the UN 80 initiative. Today, 8 years after its creation, we are pleased to witness the progress that the United Nations has helped to achieve. The independence of the Republic of Mozambique, as well as the many African countries and other continents of this planet, this is one of just one of the evidence of this legacy of the UN. Despite multiple challenges that the UN faces, it remains firm at the forefront of the global processes, which is why we emphasize that any reform effort aimed at making it more responsive and with better capacity to address contemporary realities will only be complete when we include the reform of the Security Council of the UN. Your Excellencies, the year 2025 has tested the limits of multilateralism with the United Nations at the epicenter. We have witnessed the intensification and escalation of conflicts and growing sense in the whole world, and we also see a growing sense of impunity. The ongoing conflicts in various corners of the world and the crisis remind us that the promise to save the future generations from the scourge of war, written in the letter of 1945 Charter, remains unfulfilled. 8 years of building multilateralism institutions, safeguards, and principles that have governed global affairs are now at risk. The result is clear. Wars are multiplying, the climate crisis is worsening, debt are mounting, tariffs are rising, the disillusion is spreading, and above all, the nuclear spectra is returning. Added to these threats, we also have the economic consequence of successful crisis in the world. We are talking about the pandemic of COVID-19, the war in Europe, in the Middle East, and the wars in Africa. From the rising of commodity prices to financial volatility globally. All of this generates unsustainable debt and ever-deepening inequalities in the society. We are witnessing a concerning setback of the international commitment. With only 5 years to go until 2030, the agenda of SDG is at risk because the targets have not been met and we still have a long to go. And the climate crisis accelerates and intensifies all other crises that we know. Droughts are turning up the population with famine, cyclones into humanitarian disasters, displaces into despair, which is exploited by unscrupulous stakeholders. It was in this context that the historic opinion of the International Court of Justice of 23rd of July 2025 unequivocally reaffirmed that the states have binding legal obligations to protect the climate and the environment from the greenhouse gas emissions. This is a milestone of universal significance. For countries such as Mozambique, which bears no historical responsibility for the climate crisis, but are amongst those that are the hardest hit by its consequences. Droughts, cyclones, floods, inundations. This decision is very important. It's a legal principle for us. It's a call to climate justice. It's a call to global solidarity and immediate actions from the side of all of us. The environmental crisis is compounded by the technological challenge. Artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies offer extraordinary opportunities, but also serious risks of exclusion, manipulation of the society, and even militarization throughout autonomous weapons. These advances pose new challenges to the defense and human dignity, justice, and labor. As long as we do not fully understand how these models work, we cannot entrust them critical tasks without robust safeguards in place. Otherwise, we are going to destroy the world. For that reason, Mozambique advocates a technological and climate diplomacy capable of regulating risk and democratizing benefits through genuine transfer and sharing of knowledge, of technology, so that the science and technology are not factors of exclusion, but rather instruments of climate justice and inclusive development in the world. Faced with these interconnected challenges, our continent, Africa, can and must play an active role in defining international rules and standards, formulating principles and scientific ethics, and determining research priorities, ensuring that technology innovation is always at the service of the humanity and not at the service of destruction of the humanity. In face of this crisis, the isolation is not the answer. Constructive dialogue and strengthening of multilateralism are. The Pact for the Future, adopted in 2024, offers concrete and innovative responses for relaunching of multilateralism adapted to challenges to the 21st century. Mozambique, as an African country with vast natural resources and unparalleled culture wealth, has distinguished itself in the promotion and strengthening of democracy in the African continent. Since we moved forward with political pluralism, we've been working tirelessly to consolidate the foundation of a robust democratic system, holding regular and transparent elections that reflect the will of people and ensure that every Mozambican citizen has the voice and a say in the decisions that shape the future of our nation in Mozambique. Indeed, our presence in this podium is a result of a free and a transparent process of the Mozambican people from Rovuma to Maputo, from Zumbo to Indico, and in the diaspora. We have historically had an ongoing commitment to dialogue and building bridges between different political and social actors. This commitment to the dialogue was crucial for the lasting peace achieved after decades of conflicts and for the political stability that we enjoy today in Mozambique. Currently, Mozambique stands out for its ongoing efforts to promote an inclusive national dialogue, which the public consultation phase was launched on the 10th September. We are working to ensure that all the sectors of the society, regardless of their origin, political, societal, economic position, they all should be heard and have their concerns taken into account in the national decision. This process will not only strengthen the Mozambican democracy, but also ensure that the country development is truly reflected the needs and aspirations of all Mozambicans without exception. We do believe that the true strength of a nation, it does not lie only in its ability to resolve conflicts, but it also in its ability to promote in a peaceful and constructive manner. We are proud of the progress we have made so far, and we reaffirm our commitment to continue advancing as an example of democracy in Africa, of peaceful coexistence in the African continent and in the world. We are proud to have promoted during our term the Security Council, where we were non-permanent members, the presidential statement on Africa about the role of Africa in global affairs, as well as to have contributed for the historic resolution 17/19/2023, which paved the way for the predictable and sustainable financing of the operations of support to peace in African Union through United Nation treasure. This milestone confirmed that Africa is not only a beneficiary of multilateral order, but also an indispensable actor in the reforms and revitalization. It is in this sense that Mozambique will keep defending a stronger African voice with 2 permanent seats on the Security Council and a greater weight in the decision of international financial institutions internationally. A new global financial architecture capable of alleviating debt, mobilizing financial resources for the sustainable development and climate action, as well as correcting historical asymmetries. An inclusive multilateralism which preserves intergovernmental character of the UN without allowing that this organization can become an assembly of shareholders dominated by the richest. We want to reiterate equally the fact that we want to have 2 states like Palestine living side by side with peace with Israel as the only fair way, legitimate and long-lasting, so that we can have the aspiration of both people. I would like to congratulate the countries that have recently decided to recognize Palestine, the same right that was given to Israel, contributing to reinforce legitimacy and the fact that we are going to have the solution for both states. The same way, I would like to reaffirm our firm opposition against the coercive measurements that are unilaterally excluding the people, Cuba to Venezuela, Zimbabwe to other countries in clear violation of the UN Charter against the principles of justice, solidarity, and the international law. Ladies and gentlemen, the topic chosen for this session is like it's better to be together. 8 years and counting for peace, development of human rights could not be more timely. It is intrinsically linked to the events of this week where we are having this high level in the UN, the celebration of Beijing Conference on Women, the Climate Summit, the first biennial summit for sustainable and inclusive and resilient global economy mandated by the Pact for the Future, the celebration of youth, the elimination of nuclear weapons, and the meeting on global health and well-being. All these meetings reaffirm the vitality and the centrality of the UN and conveys the same truth. What unites us as a humanity is much greater than what divides us. We are different people, but we share the same earth. We profess different creeds, but we all aspire to the same dignity. We speak different languages, but we share a single destiny. In fact, today, where we are today, we all know the date of birth, but no one knows the day they are going to die. And this is a clear sign that we all are equal like human beings. Today, the creed that we need is not one exclusion. We all need to be included, not excluded. Not isolation, but cooperation. Not unilateralism, but multilateralism based on solidarity. We need today, all of us, to have a renewed faith in the humanity's collective ability to face the common challenges of Gaia, our common home. The world is at a real turning point. We all feel this. Either we deliver the 23rd agenda that we've written it ourselves, or we will have to accept seeing a relegated and failed promise. And for this, goodwill is not enough. Honoring the principle of common responsibility and differentiality is important. We need resources on a scale. We need to work in a smarter way to align mandate with national priorities for each of us, to invest in data, technology, institutional capacity, and most of all, ensure that Africa has a full seat at the table where decisions are taken for its future. The message of Mozambique is very clear. We want partnerships based on mutual respect and shared value. To paraphrase the late President Samora Moises Machel, the president of the Popular Republic of Mozambique at the time, today Republic of Mozambique, international solidarity is not an act of charity. It is an act of unity amongst allies. The 80th anniversary of the UN invites all of us to renew our spirit of solidarity, international solidarity, and human solidarity. The challenges before us are enormous, but we are indeed better together, as the topic of the UN says. And if it is true that each generation inherits the world from the previous one, it is also true that each generation has the duty of leaving a better world for the next generation. This is the guidance principle of the Agenda 2030. It is the spirit of the Pact of the Future, and it is the reason why we have this organization, the United Nations, to transform the hope of the people in the world into actions, solidarity into concrete results for the people, so that we may have the courage, all of us in the planet, to reform with wisdom, learn from our mistakes, and the determination to offer peace, development, and human rights to everyone, all human beings in the planet. To conclude, I would like to say that Mozambique counts on the UN, and the UN can count on Mozambique. Thank you so much, everyone, and wish you success. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Mozambique. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Luong Kong, State President of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, I would like to extend my heartfelt congratulations to Madam Anna-Lena Baerbock on her election as President of the 80th session of the UN General Assembly. I am fully confident that with her experience and able leadership, this session will be a great success. I would also like to pay tribute to Mr. Philemon Young, President of the 79th session, and Secretary General Antonio Guterres for their contributions. Madam President, over the past 80 years, in spite of a multitude of challenges, the UN has stood as the embodiment of humanity's aspiration and collective commitment to peace, cooperation, and development grounded in the universal values of human rights, national independence, equality, democracy, and social progress. Multilateral cooperation has brought forth remarkable achievements, especially in preventing wars, fostering peace and cooperation, building friendships, reducing poverty and curbing diseases, improving living standards, and advancing science and technology at an unprecedented pace. Yet today, we find ourselves in a profoundly changing world facing unprecedented acute challenges. Local wars, conflicts, arms races, and the use or threat of force in the international relations are escalating at an alarming rate. Non-traditional security challenges are exerting heavy tolls on all countries and communities. The global governance, trading, and economic systems are becoming fragmented and volatile. Multilateralism itself is under strain from strategic rivalry among major powers, unilateralism, and a sharp decline in political will and necessary resources. This is precisely the time to stand united and together promote the irreplaceable role of multilateralism and a rules-based international order, with the UN at its heart. Madam President, as a nation that has endured immense pain and losses from wars, Vietnam treasures more than most the priceless values of peace. The spirit of peace, amity, compassion, and altruism is deeply woven into our national identity. This forms the bedrock for us to overcome previous sufferings, mend old wounds, shelve the past, and look towards the future with the hope to become a friend and reliable partner to all nations around the world. Peace is both the goal and the prerequisite for our journey towards a stable, just, democratic, and prosperous future. Honoring the value of peace and driving robust transformation for a sustainable future is the sincere message that Vietnam wishes to share with the international community on the occasion of the UN's 80th anniversary. In this spirit, allow me to share my reflections as follows. First, honoring the value of peace requires concrete actions rather than just words. We must reaffirm the role and primacy of international law as the cornerstone for peace and equal relations among nations. All countries should clearly demonstrate their responsibility towards upholding international law and the UN Charter, and respecting such principles as independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity, non-interference, non-use or threat of force, and peaceful settlement of disputes. Vietnam welcomes recent efforts to achieve peace and reconciliation which have yielded important results in many regions, such as the peace agreements between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We value and support all diplomatic efforts and hope that they will lead to peaceful solutions to regional and global security issues. We must nurture and practice a culture of peace by building trust, enhancing international cooperation and solidarity, promoting dialogue, listening and understanding, respecting differences, and cultivating friendship among nations. On this occasion, Vietnam calls for ceasefires and an end to all acts of violence, protection of civilians, and facilitation of humanitarian access in conflict zones. Vietnam welcomes the recent recognition of the State of Palestine by more countries and urges the international community to act swiftly to end the humanitarian crisis faced by the Palestinian people. We also reaffirm our solidarity with the state and people of Cuba and call upon the United States to lift its embargoes against Cuba and remove Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. We must further promote the role of regional organizations in promoting peace, cooperation, and development. International efforts for peace and development will be truly effective when driven by regional organizations in line with the particularities of each region and countries. As an active ASEAN member state, Vietnam is proud of ASEAN's growing strength and its centrality in the Asia-Pacific's security and development architecture. Most recently, ASEAN contributed to the ceasefire agreement between Cambodia and Thailand, and we are committed to upholding ASEAN's core values of solidarity, consensus, and unity in diversity, building a resilient, inclusive, and sustainable ASEAN community, and effectively implementing the 5-point consensus on Myanmar. We shall also strive to maintain peace, stability, security, safety, and freedom of navigation in the South China Sea in accordance with international law, particularly the UNCLOS 1982, while fully implementing the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties and working to finalize the Code of Conduct in the area. Second, in a world at a historic crossroads, we must transform boldly to shape a sustainable future. Global governance institutions, particularly the UN and international monetary and financial bodies, must undergo vigorous reforms to become more adaptive, ensure equitability, transparency, coherence, and efficiency in their operations, and better respond to the needs of all countries and peoples. Vietnam welcomes and supports efforts to reform the UN, including the UNAT initiative, to build an UN 2.0 that is leaner, more coherent, effective, and efficient. This initiative must follow a holistic and integrated approach, being driven by member states. Vietnam stands ready to share its experience in successfully implementing the Delivering as One initiative of UN organizations in the country. We must build sustainable development models based on digital transformation and green transition, two mutually reinforcing drivers that can spark a sweeping revolution. As they stand for convergence of scientific and technological advancements and environmental sustainability. To optimize this dual transformation, countries must formulate relevant master plans, invest strongly in R&D, train high-quality human resources, and developed green technology infrastructure. Furthermore, it is of great importance to advance international cooperation on technology transfer and mobilization of green finance to ensure that no one is left behind. Developed countries must take responsibility in sharing and transferring technology to developing and underdeveloped countries.